We are your home theater and AV questions answered. This is AVRant. Want your home theater or AV question answered by Tom and Rob? Send it to question@avrant.com. Welcome to another edition of AVRant. I'm Tom Andrew, and I'm here with
Rob H. This is AVRant. It's your home theater and AV questions answered. And why is March so busy, Tom? It seems like all appointments and everything and bills due and all of that stuff. It's just all in March. Why is that happening?
What are you talking about? What
In
bills?
my life.
You have bills? Oh.
It's like
you're Canadian.
Utility bills
was
are
it tax
due.
day or something?
Taxes. Yeah, well, taxes are end of April, but all the tax forms are here now, so could get it done. And then relatives doing their stuff, and like,
isn't the Snyder Cut coming out this week?
Snyder Cut's this week. I'm
just going to tell you, it still sucks. It's just going to suck less than the original one did. But if you had a couple of years and 4 hours with which to play with, you could make a movie that sucked less than the last one did, which really sucked. So, yeah, it's going to still suck. You guys are going to come at me like, oh, it was pretty good. No, it wasn't. It was pretty good compared to the other one.
I mean, if you just go by Twitter and websites, seemingly everyone has watched it already. I mean, we're recording this on the 16th. It's supposed to come out on the 18th. I have the capability of watching it because I subscribe to Crave, and that's where the HBO Max content...
Are you going to watch it? You got to watch it and tell me what you think.
I'm going to watch it. It's just Crave is only, 10... Let's see, 1080p. They don't even do 4K. Certainly no HDR and stereo audio. So I am not seeing it in the best quality. I can view the content in all of its almost 4:3 goodness.
It doesn't really matter. It's going to be fine. That's fine enough for this because you just really I want to hear about the story.
Right.
I want to hear how much better the story is.
I only ever saw Justice League, the theatrical version, in the theater. I never watched it a second time, so my recollection of what has changed could be pretty darn spotty. But yeah,
that's all right. Yeah, just remember it sucked because it did. Yeah. So the Snyder Cut's coming out this week. That's very exciting for everybody.
By the time you're hearing this,
very exciting.
You might be watching that. 2 hours of AV
I
rant.
don't care. I'm very much looking forward to the Winter Soldier thingy.
Yes.
Falcon the Winter Soldier is coming out on Friday. So
that is this week, too.
By the time
there you go. See it.
You're hearing this.
That's what I said. It's busy, Tom. March is busy.
Busy. Yeah. Very busy. In fact, it's spring break here, so my kids are like all up in my grill. So they're here. But one of them's still asleep.
Okay.
Which I should probably do something about, but I'm not gonna.
The kids are here, but Tom's beard is not. You'll have to come to YouTube to see Tom's chin.
I'm freshly shorn.
That's right.
So I grew the beard because it was COVID and I could, and then I went down to a goatee because I hate shaving around my mouth, and then it just it's gray, so it makes me look older than. I mean, it just makes me look as old as I actually am, and I don't really like that very much. So my thought process was I'm going to, when I get the vaccine, I'm going to shave.
Okay.
But then I thought maybe if I shave, I'll get the vaccine.
There's
but
some
so far
logic for you.
So far that hasn't worked out for me. There's like lists that you can get on here that are like the wasted vaccine lists.
Right. Yes. Yeah.
Because they defrost them and then people don't show up because they don't believe in science or whatever. I don't know.
Well, maybe there could be a multitude of reasons for missing an appointment. Not all of them are nefarious.
Not that appointment, but yes, there are some. I mean, I would step over the dead bodies of my own children in order to get to that appointment, but it's very specific. Can you tell I've spent a little too much time around the kids lately?
There's that.
And it's my son's birthday this week, so we've got like all kind of birthday plans that are all outside, which I hate.
Happy birthday, one of your sons.
Yeah, the middle one.
The middle one. There you go.
That's right. So he's going to have missed 2 birthdays during COVID.
Right.
So my wife will almost certainly have her vaccine by then. By the time her birthday rolls around, which is like end of May.
Okay.
So she should be vaccinated by then. Maybe I will too. She's technically eligible right now, but getting on a list here is like you got to know a person who knows a person sort of thing. Or you got to spend hours on the websites just pressing refresh and hoping.
Indeed.
So, this is AVRant, the podcast where we talk about anything but AV, apparently. We're just going to talk about this. One of these days, I'm just never going to stop the intro. We're just going to keep talking for 2 hours about whatever.
You can go back about 10 years, and that's what the show used to be.
No, that's not true. I mean, we talked about AV the entire time. Yeah, no. But this time, I won't let us do that. We'll just do 2 hours of Rob and Tom shooting the stuff.
I mean, it's me. It'll probably circle back around to AV anyway, because that's my jam.
We can talk about stuff like, talk about little stuff. Oh, Gick Acoustics.
Uh-huh.
They were supposed to ship my stuff on the 13th, so the 15th, which was yesterday. I emailed them and said, hey, what's up? Uh-huh. I didn't get no shipping. How can I track this thing? You get like 2 hours later, your order has shipped.
Oh.
Like, okay, so if you feel like abandoned by Gick, maybe just send them a quick email.
Squeaky wheel.
The squeaky wheel got the grease in this case. So hopefully those will be coming in soon. And then I can talk about them and show them on the podcast, which are the images that dude sent us, whose name I cannot remember, whose wife,
Andrew,
whatever.
Andrew sent those.
Andrew.
Yeah.
Yes, his wife made the paintings, and I had some of them put on to some panels. And if she has any more, I wish she would have sent them to me a long time ago, because I would have printed more panels, but I didn't. AVRant, the podcast that answers your home theater and AV questions. To get your questions answered, all you have to do is ask us by emailing us at question@avrant.com. Go to avrant.com, leave us a comment, facebook.com/avrantpodcast, youtube.com/avrant. You can contact Rob directly, rob@avrant.com. The Twitter is @firstreflect. Tom at avrant.com. My Twitter is @avrant_Tom. But if you want the question actually answered on the podcast, or at least a chance to have it answered on the podcast,
an excellent chance of it being on the podcast.
Okay, so question@avrant.com is how you do it.
Question@avrant.com.
The questions that do not make it to the podcast are ones that are just like clarifications and stuff like that. Stuff that doesn't really
actually said on the podcast, but there was a little unclear, or they needed a reminder or something like that. I might just shoot back a reply. I think that's fair enough. But question@avrant.com, you'll be on the podcast.
All right. So I want to thank our our listeners of the week. I had to scroll up to see what they were called.
Never said it before, so it's only fair.
No, it's the first time. We just gave them a name. I went cycling for like 28 miles, 27, I don't know.
We definitely have listeners of the podcast who are happy that you're getting into cycling. So
I know, and if any of you have bikes that are like nice, because mine's garbage, and would like to
donate,
take pity on me, I would be willing to pay for it, but I just don't have any money right now. So AV Gadgets isn't exactly paying the bills yet. Let's put it to you that way. It's still a labor of love. It's But listeners of the week, to become a listener of the week, to support the podcast in some way. You do that by going to AV. One of the ways is to go to avrant.com, click on the buy us a cup of coffee link, send us a PayPal donation. PayPal takes some money from your account or from your credit card, and then give most of it to us. So we want to thank Kevin for doing that this week. Thank you very much, Kevin.
Yes, for sure, Kevin. Thank you very much for the PayPal donation.
We also want to thank our 125. Thank you for bumping it up from 122 last week, because 125 just makes me feel better.
That's right.
For some reason. 125 patrons over at patreon.com. Patreon is a service where you can sign up to be a contributing, supporting listener, viewer person. Every month, Patreon takes some money from you and give most of it to us. So thank you to our 125 patrons.
Indeed. Patreon.com/AVRant podcast. For anyone who would like to sign up, I consider it a voluntary subscription. So 125 supporters over there, 125 patrons, and thank you all very much for the support.
All right, Byron. Well, first of all, if you can't support us financially, we understand. It's fine.
Although this one's financial too.
This one is also financial. But if you've done something that's outside of the realm of Patreon or sending us directly money, then tell us what you did if we didn't figure it out for ourselves, and we will mention you. So Byron sent Rob a tip via PayPal to help him for helping him out on Twitter. So I guess thank you, Byron.
Yes, thank you, Byron. I very much appreciate it. Generous as always. So yeah, that was very nice.
James managed to get Anthem to send him one of their new MRX740 receivers. And since he lives reasonably close to Rob, he invited Rob over on the weekend to check it out in a limited amount of time. what does in the limited amount of time mean? Does that mean that you went in and he went out and you didn't stay in the same room?
No, but it meant his wife and baby left the place, so that limit the potential exposures to each other. James and I were both heavily masked up and made sure to sanitize hands and all that stuff. Plus, parking was only for 2 hours, so I wasn't going to stick around and get a ticket.
There you go. All right. So 2 hours. I guess you can share some of your details.
Yes, mainly about that Anthem receiver itself, because they are brand new, and I had some questions about them, and some other people are considering them as well. So some interesting things. First of all, one of the questions that is answered is, yes, the microphone that comes with the Anthem that they use for their new Anthem ARC Genesis setup. Now, by all appearances that I can tell from the outside, other than obviously the name branded on the outside, sure looks like it is a UMic 1. No surprises there if it is. It's a USB microphone. Now, some people had reported with previous Anthem microphones that getting that microphone to work with Room EQ Wizard was sometimes a challenge. This one seemed to work fine as long as you were using the ASIO drivers, which is an optional thing that you add to Room EQ Wizard, but as long as you load in the ASIO for all drivers, that microphone showed up just fine. Now, whether it'll take accurate measurements with it pointed straight up at the ceiling because we don't have a calibration file for it to load into Room EQ Wizard, not totally sure, but if it is basically a UMic 1, and like I say, by all appearances, it sure seems to be, then just getting the generic, 90-degree calibration files and loading that in, maybe you'll be off by 1 or 2 decibels at certain frequencies, but it should be darn close. So, you're kind of getting a mic that'll work with things other than ARC. It also came with a tripod, not expecting that, except for some reason the threads that they use on the tripod are not standard microphone sized threads. It's the photo sized threads. So fitting my other mic clip onto that took an adapter. So those were fun things to be aware of. Now, you can do the very basic setup just using the screen that is on the front of the Anthem. Everything is done within profiles. There are 4 profiles to choose from, and so that was a bit annoying because you have to get into a specific profile, then make sure that profile is active and do your basic speaker setup there. There is a very, very basic on-screen, on your television output, but it's not a graphical user interface. It's just kind of the same list that's being shown on the front of the receiver itself. So it's not exactly super spiffy that way. And then you really can't do anything else unless you're connected to the network, because all of the Anthem stuff is through a web interface on your computer, or the Anthem ARC Genesis setup software is a piece of software that runs on your computer. None of that happens on the AV receiver's display itself. So the first hour of our 2 hours was spent trying to get the darn thing to connect to the network. Because it seems the unit that James was sent was not necessarily completely brand new out of the box. And for some reason, it took both of us, who are technical people who do podcasts and lots of stuff online, nearly an hour to figure out, why don't we just factory reset this thing, which we did. And then it managed to connect to the internet with an Ethernet cable. So yeah, that was kind of a waste of time, unfortunately. But once that was done, it did itself a firmware update. Now, the questions I had were, can it cross-pollinate up mixers? Anthem actually at one point responded to an email of mine and said, no, we're not doing that right now and we don't intend to. Well, it does. I don't know if that was just because of the latest firmware update that happened right away once we actually got it connected to the internet, but it does. It does cross-pollinate up mixers. So you can apply DTS Neural X to your Dolby signals, which was a question I had. Now, it has Dolby Volume. That is what they are using for curves of equal loudness. But I wanted to know, is it like their previous implementation of Dolby Volume where you could separate the curves of equal loudness from the dynamic range compression? Or is it like every other implementation of Dolby Volume ever where those two things are tied together and there's only off, low, medium, and high for how much dynamic range compression is applied, and there is no way to have no dynamic range compression while still having curves of equal loudness? Well, they're in the same boat as everybody else now. They don't call them low, medium, and high anymore. They call them, now, and this was a fun thing too, in the manual, they say it's off, music, movie, or night mode, which is the same as low, medium, high, right? The music mode in the manual is everything gets contained within a 18 decibel window. Everything in the movie mode would be contained within a 8 to 10 decibel window, and everything in the night mode is like a 3 to 6 decibel window. Except in the AV receiver itself, the order was movie, music, night. So I don't know which one is which. I assume it just goes in order from off to low, medium, and high. So those were the two basic ones. Then I wanted to see Arc Genesis. The main question I have about Arc Genesis, first of all, pretty darn good software. The curves that are being showed on there are definitely smooth. It looks like 1/6 octave smoothing, if I'm just guessing at how smooth it appears to be. Has a very handy real-time analyzer, probably the handiest thing of all of it before actually doing the auto setup procedure, is having that real-time analyzer. But I wanted to see what they're doing with multiple subwoofers, because this is like the first time that they're advertising that they're doing multiple subwoofers. In fact, up to 4 independent subwoofers in the top of the line AVM 90 Pre-Pro. Except that we discovered the MRX740 and 540, the two lowest models, it's just an internal Y splitter. There are no independent subwoofer outputs. So he has one subwoofer at his place, James does. I even hauled over my Axiom EP500 because that's like, it's in my living room where it's easiest to take a subwoofer out. I forgot that thing has the density of a neutron star, so that was a bad decision.
Yes, right. Yeah.
But
did he live upstairs?
No, he's ground floor, so that was handy.
Oh, that's good. At least,
yeah, and had a ramp.
You're still gonna lose some skin.
Yeah, I got a bruise on my arm for. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah,
picking it up.
Yeah.
So. So anyway,
I don't understand. It seems like even though they're right angles.
Right.
It actually seems like they're at a knife point. all the angles of that sub. I'll be honest. I mean, I love that sub as far as performance wise.
Very good.
But it is like walking near one of those plants in the Mario games.
Right.
You know what I mean? It reaches out and snaps at you as you're going by.
I'm feeling like I should get an SB1000 Pro just so I have a subwoofer I can take around places much more easily. So anyway, wasn't able to test how it handles multiple subwoofers, unfortunately, which was one of the major questions. So I still don't have first-hand knowledge of that. But anyway, thank you to James. He appreciated that I came over and went through stuff as well. So yeah, that was good, and crammed a lot into there, except waste a lot of time on network setup.
Okay. Well, I don't know that any of us were very enlightened by that, but yes, it happened. Okay. Notes of gratitude from a couple of people and from keeping this podcast going, which pretty soon we won't have to get any more of these notes of gratitude because
that is the hope.
We will just have a podcast going, and there will no longer be a pandemic, or at least not as raging as it was. Eric, Ari, Tyler, Dave, Carl, and Bobby. Thank you, gentlemen, and we will keep plugging along as long as we can. That's for sure.
Eric, Ari, Tyler, Dave, Carl, and Bobby, thank you very much for those notes of gratitude and encouragement. We do appreciate them.
You know, it's frustrating. Going back to your experiences with Anthem, it's frustrating when you're trying to get a new piece of gear and get a good sense of it in a very short period of time, and it's very hard to do. And like you said, a lot of times what they'll do is instead of if it's a review unit, they'll have whoever had it last pack it up, and they'll send them a shipping label that goes to the next person. And there is no factory resetting. You have no idea what condition this thing's going to get to you in. It might have a ding in the side or whatever if it's speakers. So, it's a process.
The quick sweep tests were handy because James discovered that on the back of his Klipsch towers, which are bi-ampable, he's like, oh, the jumper must have come off one of those because only my tweeter is playing anything right now.
Well, there you go. See, it was beneficial. In the news, THX readjusted their certification tiers into Compact, Select, Ultra, and the new Dominus level.
All the other ones are words that they invented.
Yeah, and then Dominus, they're just like Dominus Maximus.
That's right.
Caesar took over after Caesar, which certifies speakers and subwoofers for rooms up to 6,500 cubic feet and listening distances up to 20 feet. They could have gone Select, Ultra, and what is Extreme would have been the easiest way to do this.
Omega.
I mean, Extreme. At least you can still go beyond. You can have Omega out, and you can't put Omega because
it is the end.
You could still have something else after that. So now the first THX Dominus speakers have arrived. A new company, PerListen Audio, which I guess stands for perceptual listening.
That's what they say.
Which, as opposed to tactile listening, I don't know. Basically set out specifically to meet the new Dominus certification. They're using beryllium tweeters that only play down to 4.4 kilohertz. At that point, they cross over into dual 1.1-inch carbon fiber upper mid-range drivers that are arranged above and below the tweeter to control vertical directivity while maintaining wide horizontal dispersion. This vertical mid-tweeter mid-array is all housed within a waveguide that they call DPC, Directivity Pattern Control Array. They missed the A in the DPC, whatever. The mid-range is 500 hertz to 1.1 kilohertz. It's handled by 7-inch carbon fiber drivers, and an additional 7-inch carbon fiber woofer handles the bass. The 4-way S7 towers cost $8,000 each, and the 4-way center is $7,000. There's also a 3-way stand-mounted monitor, which will save you a cool $1,500 off the top of the tower. So, whatever, $6,500 each. That is a THX Ultra certified as a front speaker. It doesn't quite reach the Dominus certification as a front. It's more than enough as a Dominus surround, because surrounds are like 2 feet away from you. And there are bookshelf, $3,500 each, and a wedge-shaped surround height model, $3,000 each. That meets Dominus certifications as surrounds only. Finally, there are 12-inch and 15-inch subwoofer models with a dual 15-inch and a push-pull configuration going for $9,000. So, from a company I've never heard of before.
They are brand new. It's a brand new company.
Don't know that. I would like to see some measurements, please, sir. Can you send it to somebody who's going to measure it, not me? Send it to somebody who's going to do some measurements.
I mean, you're trusting THX, because THX does a whole battery of measurements to certify.
But do they really certify flatness?
Yes.
Of the frequency response?
I thought is certainly part of it. Frequency response, off-axis response. Now, they're still sticking to their guns about vertical directivity should be limited and horizontal dispersion should be wide. So, I mean, not everybody agrees with that approach, that the vertical directivity should be narrow, but THX is sticking with that. So that is what they have designed in the PerListen speakers, which I personally, when I looked at that, I'm like, I don't think that stands for perceptual listening. I think it means you get charged per listen. Yeah,
it does. But I think that you'll end up on top. I think if you paid per listen, you would probably end up not spending as much money.
Not as expensive as I kind of imagined. Like, I mean, these are expensive, but $8,000 each for the flagship towers is that's not as expensive as some other stuff that's out there that's using similar drivers. So, yeah.
I need to take a look at these things, but I'll do it while you're talking on the next thing. Some comments here. Graham thought we might find Arlington's airtight electrical boxes potentially useful. They have gaskets built in on the front face to seal the back of the to the back of the drywall, and gaskets where the wires enter the back of the box. So rather than dealing with putty pads or filling it up with foam, these airtight boxes will take care of stopping those flanking paths. That's a good idea.
Yeah,
they're ugly, but that's fine.
You're not going to see them. I don't know how much they cost. I didn't find that information. But anyway, I mean, if you just want the least amount of hassle, the fastest install, then yes, something that already comes with a gasket everywhere that it attaches makes sense.
So this has to be new construction. This is not something you do.
This is not retrofit.
This is not retrofit. So yeah, for the rest of us.
Yeah.
Let's get to the questions here. Mark and his wife just bought their first house. Congratulations, dude. Apparently that's becoming less and less common with people. It used to be like the American dream, and now it's like, well, if you're rich. But, or at least well off. So congratulations, though, because first houses are very exciting. And you do discover very soon after buying your first house that it didn't come with a lawnmower or a mop. And that's always very exciting. Mark and his wife just bought their first house. They can finally have a room that is dedicated to just being a theater. It'll be a spare bedroom that's 10 by 14 by 8. The ceiling fan that's in there right now will be removed. Yeah, I actually like that fan because I've seen it before, but in the image here, it looks very strange.
Well, it's a panorama shot, so geometry is all a little warped.
Things are a little askew. So his wife explicitly said that she wants a 65-inch TV, so he wasn't going to complain, and they intend to sit 7 feet away. Trying to budget things out for both audio and video, the Samsung Q80T for $1,500 seems like a good choice. He relied on ratings. Yes. Ratings. Ask me how I say the artist's name, who everybody else calls The Weeknd, because I do the exact same thing, and it drives my friend's 19-year-old daughter bonkers. She can't stand it. I'm like, she starts talking about him, and I will correct her. I'll like stop her in the middle of a sentence. And you're saying his name wrong. Doesn't have an E. You got to leave out the E.
That's right.
He relied on ratings and reviews, and that model seems to have what they're looking for. But the brand new Neo QLED models are starting to show up now. The QN85A that replaces the Q80T has a similar MSRP as when the Q80T was brand new. So that's around $2,100. So would it be, that's $600 more. So would it be worth it? Is the mini LED backlight a huge improvement, or should he save the money so that he can put down a bit more towards the audio budget? Well, I mean, obviously Rob's going to tell you, but the big thing is that there's a lot more backlighting zones, right?
There are many more zones, yes.
And that's usually, I mean, performance aside, that is a good thing. It might not have implemented it correctly or whatever, but it should make for a better viewing experience with less blooming. So, I mean, I don't know if it's worth $600 extra, but I mean, if it just means you have to save a little bit more for, getting that second subwoofer later, right. I would probably consider it. I would heavily consider it.
Yeah, so this is a little bit tricky one because, I mean, we don't have, I haven't gone eyes on with the Neo QLEDs yet. There are some early reviews out there, none of them from reviewers that I trust implicitly. The general consensus, though, is that, so first of all, one that I do trust pretty darn well are the guys over at AV Forums over in the UK. Now, they saw the flagship QN95A, which isn't even a model that's available in the United States, but it has the same performance as the QN90A that we're getting in the North America. It's just that the 95A that's only available in Europe has the One Connect box, which actually gets you 4 HDMI 2.1 inputs instead of only one, which is what you get in the 90A. The 85A should have that One Connect box with the 4 HDMI 2.1 input, so that is worth something over the single HDMI 2.1 input. But what they noticed, first and foremost, Samsung seems to have finally gotten on board with actually presenting accurate electro-optical transfer function for high dynamic range, which is the rate of rise from dark to bright. It was always overly bright before, and you had to do a fair amount of adjustment to bring it in line to the actual standard. Now Samsung has finally gotten on board with the actual standard, which is why I suspect all of the early reviews from everyone else are saying, it looks dimmer, I don't like it as much. So I'm pretty sure that's really just what's essentially gamma. It's the electrical optical transfer function actually being accurate now. But the other thing that everybody is pointing out is, yes, there are many more zones of local dimming. It's using these mini LEDs as backlights, but part of what they're touting is that because the backlights are so much smaller, they're physically closer to the LCD panel now. The thickness of the entire TV has been shrunk down. It's thinner from front to back, but all the lights are physically closer to the LCD panels, which means that even though there's many more of the lights, and now you have several hundred local dimming zones instead of 100 or fewer, you can actually see the blooming a little bit more easily because the light isn't being diffused, right? If you have a really small little point of light, then you see, because the light is like right there behind the LCD and it doesn't get diffused. So yeah, it's a bit of give and take. That seems to be the early review stuff anyway, and it makes sense that might be the case. Also, people have been pointing out that like as soon as you move off axis, you can see the blooming more easily. Again, suspicion is that it's because the light is closer. So bottom line, like the last year's, the Q80T, the Q90T, they weren't my favorite TVs. It's by no means the case where I'm saying, oh, you got one that's terrible, you should return it. Nothing like that. It just wasn't my favorite. It's not what I would...
Did he already buy it? I thought he was just thinking about it.
No, he's just thinking of it. So, right. And I mean, if this is what it's going to be with the new Neo QLEDs, I'm like, it's probably still not going to be my top favorite. Again, I'm not going to be mad at anyone for buying it. I'm not going to actively tell you not to get it, but it's probably not my favorite. So if you were willing to spend upwards of $2,000 on a 65-inch TV, I'm like, get an OLED. An OLED. Because they're on sale right now while they're clearing out the last of the X models, the CX and the BX. Like, for sure.
Is C better or B better?
C is better. Now, that was one of the questions, too, because some people are worried about the B because the report from ratings and others is that it's a little bit dimmer. And
I'm like stock in that crap.
This whole thing about the brightness it throws me for a loop. I don't know what people want. I have a suspicion that there are a whole lot of people that actually need glasses but refuse to get them, and that is why they want their TV to be so freaking bright, because then they can actually see stuff. That's like the only explanation.
It seems to me that Ratings just cares, so much about that brightness thing that the people who comment on it are also sort of indoctrinated to that. So when you're reading reviews, you kind of have to know like what the site cares about or what the place cares about.
Their reviews are really good. It's really comprehensive, but they do focus on that 10% brightness window to an inordinate amount.
Right.
So anyway,
and that's hard if you're a casual reader.
Yes,
you're not going to pick up on that.
Exactly. Yeah.
So
the B10, I have no problem recommending. The processor isn't quite as good, which means that in like high compressed streaming content, if you're looking at something in the shadows, you might see some more blocking and banding in the darks of a B10 than you do in a C10. That does a bit better job cleaning that up. And you have 2 HDMI 2.1 inputs instead of 4 on the C10. But other than that, the B10 is a darn good deal, and you're saving like $100. So yeah, that is definitely possible. The B10s are definitely available for like $1,800, $1,900. So that is where I would point you. Now, if you're like, I just don't want an OLED for some reason, I don't really know why that would be the case. The main reason to me would be that for about the same price, you could get a 75-inch. That to me is something where, it's going to be at least $3,000 for the 77-inch OLED. So if you're like, the max budget I have is $2,000, well, then I could point you to like a 75-inch where I'm going to point you to a Vizio P Quantum X or a Sony. Now, the X900H is still here, but their brand new ones, their X90J and X95J are just starting to come out. The X95J, which I haven't had a chance to go eyes on yet, I'm excited about that one because last year the X950H was actually superior in many ways to the X900H, just picture quality wise, but it didn't have any HDMI 2.1 inputs, so the X900H was the much more popular model. This year, the X95J gets HDMI 2.1 inputs, so assuming, and there's no reason to suspect it would have any different picture quality because nothing changed about Sony's LCDs, so the X95J is one to keep an eye on if you're looking at new models. So OLED or Vizio P Quantum X or Sony X95 or X90J are the ones I would look at most highly.
Okay. For this room size, would we say that the new SVS SB1000 Pro makes sense? So it's 10 by 14 by 8.
Yes.
I mean, it will work just fine.
Yeah, more than fine.
Yeah,
I think that is a great choice.
It's nice and small.
Yes.
You could get more extension if you went with a lower extension if you went with the SB2000, but
for $300 more, unnecessary.
Yeah, I don't think you're not gonna.
I think you'd be really happy with a 1000 Pro in a room this small and enclosed.
But you meant 2 though, right? You meant 2.
That's the hope.
2. Yeah. So he doesn't know exactly how much budget he'll have available for new speakers right away. He has a pair of PSB bookshelf speakers he can use if he literally can't buy anything else right away. Plus an old Marantz SR5002 from his own experience. He'd buy a subwoofer before adding surrounds. Would not suggest that. But okay, he has his eye on a Prime Bookshelf 5.1 setup. What are our opinions on that being the speaker package for his room? And the other speakers around the same price we might recommend more highly. And if budget is super tight, what do we think of his idea of starting with just 2 bookshelf speakers and adding a sub as soon as possible, then center and surrounds later? How does your wife feel about this little plan of yours? Before, I mean, because I think that as much as we love subwoofers around here, and Tommy loves himself some subs. That's got you. I can't stress that high enough. But it is more impressive to go from stereo to surround than it is to go from stereo to a sub, in my opinion. Especially a single sub where you might be getting uneven response across the seats. So your seat is sounding pretty good and her seat is sounding pretty bad. I think it's more impressive to the casual listener that sound now comes from all around. I'll be honest. I think I could take out every speaker in my home theater except for the center channel and my wife would not notice. I don't think she would have a clue that I had taken out anything
I don't have a
whatsoever
problem on the order that he specified, especially because he said he's like basically gone through it before, and that's the way he would do it. So I don't.
That's fine.
I don't have a problem.
I mean, if you're going to do it, that's just
completely disagree with Tom either, but I don't have a problem with that. I mean, you're going to start with the front, left, and right, no matter what. So then the question is, what's the very next thing you buy? If someone's like, in my experience, I'd rather get a subwoofer before surrounds. I'm like, yeah, I'm fine with that. So I'm not going to tell you that you must do otherwise.
But that's why I said, what does your wife say?
Yeah.
I mean, because really, you're going to end up there anyways. You're going to end up there anyway,
yeah.
So you might as well look at the other person and say, honey, what would you like? And if she says she doesn't care, she's lying. She does. So, walk her through the options and let her pick. So, I mean, not let her, but encourage her input. Because, I mean, that's I think that gets more people in trouble than anything else. Guys, girls, whatever, doesn't make any difference.
Not considering the other person.
Not, I mean, making decisions without consulting, especially decisions that you honestly are like, well, I mean, I prefer this, but I don't really care.
And you're gonna wind up at the end result.
You're
eventually.
gonna wind up at this. Yeah, you're gonna wind up at the same place.
Yeah, I mean, a prime bookshelf 5.1 package. So that's the bookshelf fronts, the center, and the satellite surrounds. I'm like that.
Surrounds.
That is a completely reasonable choice for this room and a good choice for this room. And if you got it, I don't envision you being disappointed with that whatsoever. I
don't necessarily agree, but go ahead.
I would just say I would point as an alternative that's about the same price. I'm not necessarily going to claim it's way better or something like that, but just 5 Ascend HDM 200 SEs. I could easily point you to that, and again, I'd be kind of surprised if anyone were disappointed with that in this size of room.
Especially if you decide to go the route of the front, left, and right, and then the sub. I would consider taking it real slow.
Okay.
First of all, you just bought your first house, and there are expenses like I was joking about earlier. Lawnmower and stuff like that.
Well, that's why he's not sure how much he'll have if he even has any budget for speakers.
Right. I would just take it. I would just like super casual about it, like, because you're gonna get there.
Okay.
You're gonna get there. You've already got a room for it, which is way better than everybody else. Almost everybody else out there. Most people do not buy a house and think this is the room that the TV will be in. I'm going to tell you, and I wrote this on AV Gadgets as well somewhere. I can't remember the article, but having a dedicated room is a huge bonus. Because especially if you say we're going to put a TV in here, it's going to be nice and big. We're going to have a full surround sound. It's going to be awesome, and then no more TVs in the house. Right. It's just this room that you can kind of go off to. So I absolutely love it. But I think that if it were me, what I would do is, especially since like the size of the room really dictates your subwoofers, you could get your PSBs up front, buy your first sub, throw it in the corner someplace, right? Live with that for a while, and then save up money slowly for either the second sub or a front 3 speakers, and then move your PSBs to the back. Then you can maybe budget for, instead of getting a 5.1 satellite, 5.1 system, you're now only buying 3 speakers, which can be maybe the Ultra series up front. And from SVS.
Does he need Ultra series in this room?
Need? No. Want? Yes. Absolutely. Okay. I mean, and then he could actually be looking at the Sierra 2s or, all kinds of other things he could be doing. So, if you brought home, if you said, I've already ordered the 5.1 system and blah, 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 we would be, round of applause. He's nailed it. He's killing it over there. But if you take it slow, you maybe can really spend some time listening to some speakers and getting the perfect speakers for you, and then slowly, building the entire system the exact way you want it to be. But like I said, if you get the 5.1 system, or if you get the SB 1000 Pro and throw it in the corner, and then wait until you have enough money for the 5.1 package so that you can add the second sub and get everything else, I think that'd be a perfectly valid thing to do as well. But what I'm trying to do is make your life more difficult. So you're welcome,
and
sir.
Take longer. Yes.
Take longer. So he's definitely looking at accessories for less for a new receiver. Any reason for him to go beyond the Denon X2600H? It doesn't have HDMI 2. Whatever it is, right?
Doesn't have HDMI 2.1, no.
Right,
any of the ones that you can buy right now today have at most a single input, so it's not even a switch. One thing, if you have to wait anyway, I would definitely consider waiting to see at least what gets announced for this year if they have at least more than one HDMI 2.1 input, so you can use the darn thing as a switch. So that's a consideration.
there's that, and then there's also I don't want to have to send I don't want to have to do switching sources at my TV.
Right.
You know what I mean? And I don't want to have to like say, okay, well, I can't even send my one source through the receiver because I have to split it because the TV can accept, HDR or whatever, and this thing can't pass through the full bit rate. So yeah, I would definitely wait on the receiver for right now.
The only other thing to consider going like between Denon's X2000, whatever the number is, 2800, I guess it'll be this year, versus like what'll be the 3800 is, do you ever plan to go beyond 5.2.2 or 7.2? Because the X2000, the X2600 for sure tops out at 7 speakers maximum. So I don't. It doesn't sound like he had any plans for Atmos whatsoever. It's going to stop at 5.1, which honestly, totally fine with that. We are not going to tell you that you need to. It was just a matter of if you had it at all in your mind that you might want to have 4 overhead speakers at some point, then the X2600H can't do it. It can do 2 overhead speakers at most.
Yeah, I guess what I always say when you're shopping for receivers is you shop for the features that you know that you're going to use, and you don't care about the rest of it. So for me, when I shop, and I've said this before, it's all about the room correction. I want the best room correction because I want to make sure I can fine-tune my system as much as I can. You haven't even talked to us about room treatments, which you should be talking to us about room treatments, because that is also something you should be planning for. DIY or not, you should be thinking about those as well. But I would recommend at the very least you get a receiver that can do 9 speakers. And that's just so that you have the option of adding the Atmos, you have the option of adding the surround backs, and
it'll come with Multi-Q XT32 instead of XT. That comes with. Yeah.
Or get the Yamaha. The Yamahas are perfectly fine too. So you got those options. Julian in the UK. Julian is loving his KEF LS50 speakers, so much so that he got another pair for his home office, which is only 10 by 8 feet in size. He's using a NAD M33 stereo integrated amp, which includes DRAC Live correction and the Blue OS interface that he really likes. Good. He already owns an ELAC S10 EQ subwoofer. He is the only person listening in his office, and he has free reign over where the subwoofer gets placed, so the single sub seems fine. According to DRAC's before measurements, it's going down to 28 hertz before rolling off pretty steeply. But for music only, no movies, that seems to be fine. So would he hear any benefit if he were to switch to the new FCS SB1000 Pro? The KEF LS50 speakers were an obvious and great improvement in sound quality over his old speakers, but would a better subwoofer audibly deliver anything close to the same improvement in quality? So for music only, it really depends on what music you listen to, but the answer is you probably not. You probably will not audibly hear a difference.
Quite confident in saying it won't be the sort of difference that you noticed going to the LS50s.
No.
I would say there's a chance it would be a little bit more than an absolutely not noticeable at all improvement. There's a chance you might notice something, but it will not be the kind of difference that you heard in going to the LS50s, if any difference at all.
This is not a purchase I would make.
Right.
I'll be honest with you, especially in an office setting. Yeah. I think that if it rolls off at around 35, I'm pretty much okay
for music only.
For music only, I think 28 is more than you need. Yeah, so I mean, you're listening to some organ music. Right. Is that your jam? Right. So every once in a while you might be able to notice a bit of a difference here or there, or hear something that you didn't hear before, or feel something you didn't feel before. But yeah, I don't really, especially if you're streaming music too, if it's not like, lossless quality CD stuff that you burned yourself, it just doesn't have anything down there.
It's going to be subtle and slight at best.
Right. I guess the advantage would be, and I don't know about that ELAC. It does have the letters EQ in it, so I guess it has an EQ. I know that the new SVSs have parametric EQ built in that you could utilize, but
sure.
Whatever. Yeah, no. I just don't see this being a thing.
The ELACs have that weird thing where they're like, use the microphone that's built into your phone and take a near field measurement, and they try to equalize that to what's built in. I'm like, well, that doesn't work. So, yeah.
So don't do that. Lance picked up both an LG CX OLED and a Sony A9G OLED. He wanted to compare them head to head for himself, and one of them's got to go back. He tends to have the winner professionally calibrated, but right out of the box, the Sony's picture basically looked perfect to him. He tried adjusting the LG CX's pictures himself, but Sony's just looked cleaner? Question mark. Well, on the audio side, he's got an Atmos system that's powered by a Marantz SR7012 using eARC from both TVs. He was hearing an obvious difference in voices, with the LG sounding great and cinematic, while the Sony was lacking. The LG says it's 2.1, while the Sony says it's only 2.0. Is there some difference in the audio chipset that could account for what he heard via eARC? Am I stopping here? Because it sounds like I should stop here.
We can answer that to begin with. So the LG saying it's 2.1 and the Sony saying it's 2.0. That is the speaker system of the TV itself, which you aren't using.
Yeah. Right.
You're using eARC to send the audio signal out to a separate.
And that should be coming down like Dolby Digital, right?
I mean, they ought to be identical. If it's a bit stream coming out of both of them, there should be no audible difference between them whatsoever.
So it sounds like it could be a setting that, like in this eARC, that he should be looking at to make sure that it's bit streaming out and not doing
converting
something else.
It to PCM or converting everything to 5.1 Dolby Digital or 5.1 DTS only and not sending the original bit stream. There's also the possibility that the TV speakers are still active while the ARC is active, and if you don't basically deactivate the TV's internal speakers or turn the TV's volume all the way down to 0, that you're actually hearing both sound sources coming, and that can really make the sound come out kind of weird sometimes. That's not an impossibility. So there is no reason for the audio to sound any different between the two TVs when you're using eARC out to an AV receiver. If you were talking about the built-in speakers, that's different. But that is not what we're talking about. And as far as that 2.1 versus 2.0, that's what they're referring to as the built-in speakers. Or in the case of the Sony, it's actually the entire screen itself gets vibrated to produce the sound.
I was going to say that 0.1 is a little...
Yes.
I guess it's optimistic would be my word to describe that.
In terms of the picture, too, I mean, he was mostly talking about the straight-out-of-the-box settings. Now, I would have to admit, if I looked at an LG OLED straight out of the box and I didn't change any picture settings at all, like even the picture mode, it's kind of bad how bad they look, because they've got all of the power saving turned on and the like ambient room light sensor that like totally pumps the brightness on the picture, and it just looks bad. So there's not... So, okay, professionally calibrated, if it's a professional calibrator who's coming in and do what I would do, which is turn off all of the fancy processing that they trademarked, then the two of them are going to look darn near identical at the end of it.
Well, do you really think he needs to professionally calibrate this thing, though? I mean, I kind of feel like, you could follow the Ertings or whatever it is.
Yeah,
there's guides online that you can take a look at. You could. I'm sure we've addressed some of it here on some different podcasts, but I feel like you put it into this.
I mean, if he hasn't had one before, I still fall on the whole thing of if he hadn't had a professional calibration done ever before, it's still a nice thing to have it done at least once to really. So
let me tell you this. My wife and I have had this discussion recently a couple of times. So I went and had a bike fitting, which is something that many people are going, what is that? Well, they literally put sensors on you and they have you take your bike in and they hook it up to a machine and you cycle and then it's like you go in place and they see how your body is and then they make adjustments to the bike so it fits your body better. My wife this weekend wanted to get some new shoes. Well, there's a place in town called the St. Pete Running Company store. I don't remember. Anyways, they have this whole service where they put you on the shoes, put you on the treadmill. They have you run. They have cameras all over the place to do this. And the kind of discussion we have is, I can figure out what shoes I want based on what I think. I can figure out where I should, how I should adjust my bike based on YouTube videos. She's got a planter out front that she wants to redo, and she started doing it herself and then decided she wants to talk to a landscape designer because she's just, I just need to have a professional to tell me, to put me into a place that I know that at least somebody who knows what the heck they're doing did something so that then I can adjust it myself, which is what I did with my bike, which is what she did when she started choosing between the different shoes that they offered her, and what she will do when this landscape designer works with her. She's, they'll make suggestions, and then Tanel will say, I don't like that plant and I like this one better, or I don't want that many, or I want this. So she can make changes, but you come from a place where you know that it was at least done right the first time. So if that's what you want, that baseline, then I think it's worth it. But if you are not worried about it as much, or not stressed out about it that much, and are willing to just go through and make the changes based on things that are said online, I think you're still going to get 95% of the way to a professional calibration without having to pay the $300 or $400 or whatever it is to get there. So
it was kind of funny,
if that peace of mind is worth the money to you, then I think you should do it. But if you'd rather save the money, I think you can get very close to a professional calibration without having to spend.
Yeah, since I was reading Lance's words directly in his email, I was like, two thoughts occurred to me. One, it seemed like he was, just kind of playing around with settings, but totally fine to do. But it seemed like he was kind of enamored by some of the processing that Sony applies, which
right.
A lot of reviewers talk about how good the processing is, and then I come along, I'm like, I just turn it all off. I don't want you to change the original signal. There's that, and so because of that, and because he was kind of enjoying some of that, I'm like, I wonder if he'll actually like the results of a professional calibration, because they're just going to turn it all off.
I mean, it's like I said when we were staying on the Airbnb and the soap opera effect was happening on the TV. And my wife, it took her a couple of days, but after a couple of days, was like, "What is wrong with this TV? Why does everything look so weird?" And I, kind of walked her through it. These it's kind of like Yamaha's DSP modes. You turn them on so that you can hear the Rock Arena, and then Rock Arena 2, and then Orchestra or whatever, Auditorium. You turn it on and it's like kind of cool. And then like 5 minutes later, you're like, yeah, can we just like not hear it like that and hear it normal the way it's supposed to be? And that's sort of the way these video settings end up being for most people, which is you start off with them on, you think it's kind of cool, and then eventually somebody goes, why does it look weird? And you turn it all off.
I would just say that as far as the C10 versus the A9G specifically, in terms of picture quality, in terms of audio quality, they're going to come out virtually identical as long as all the settings are adjusted to the standards. Where the differences lie, the reason I personally prefer the C10 is simply because I like LG's frame-by-frame dynamic tone mapping for HDR10, which the Sony one doesn't offer, and the gaming features. The C10 has all the superior gaming features, and the A9G doesn't. Now, if you're not into gaming with a PS5 or an Xbox Series X or one of the brand new NVIDIA or ATI graphics cards, then that isn't going to matter to you. So if it's purely about picture quality and audio quality, once they're all calibrated and adjusted, it's going to be a wash.
Yeah. Lastly, yes, and what about the potential about potentially waiting for the new 2021 models? Anything that would make it worthwhile? He's going for a 77-inch regardless. I don't know.
On the Sonys, the brand new A90J, A90J is the OLED, and on the G1 series of LGs, they have those new brighter OLED panels that everyone is all excited about, and I think is completely unnecessary because I don't think they need to be any brighter, but people are all excited about it, and those have them. It's only those two series. It's only the Sony Master series, the A90J, and the G1 series in LG. If you go for a C1 series, it's going to be the successor to the C10, then you do not get that brighter panel on the C1 series. So if you don't want to pay about $1,500 more than the models that you're looking at, size for size, and if you're at all like me, where like, yeah, it's the contrast that matters. It's being able to see all the detail in the highlights and the shadows at the same time, as opposed to just being like, I put it in vivid mode and I hit 1,300 hits, and the old one could only hit 980. Well, that number's bigger, so I have to have it. Right. I think all of that is completely useless.
Nits for the new watts.
Right. Pretty much. So I would get myself a 77-inch C10 in a heartbeat. They're like $3,200 right now.
Okay. Manny finally tried out the Audyssey editor app with his Marantz SR6014. The first time he ran it after he uploaded the results to his receiver, he couldn't hear anything coming out of his speakers. He cranked up the volume dial, and then he could barely make out some sound coming only from his rear heights. So he re-uploaded the same file, and all of his speakers became audible, but it sounded bad. So we ran the whole Audyssey editor app setup again. Now it sounded good. He made the usual manual changes afterwards that we would recommend: small for all speakers, 80 Hz crossover for anything that was set lower. Left a higher crossover that was auto set for surrounds and heights. He's happy for the most part, but he has some questions. Any idea what the heck happened what the heck happened the first time? Should he be worried that maybe his receiver has a defect? No. If it had a defect, it'd do it every time.
Right.
It'd be broken every time. So no, something was askew. My guess, if you want to be actually totally honest, is like the microphone wasn't totally plugged all the way in. Yeah. That would be my guess.
Yeah, something
it was plugged in
hinky.
enough to put it into the Audyssey mode, but not enough to get like a signal out of it. So that would be my guess. Right. But I mean, it could literally be anything. It could have just been a corrupted file that it didn't save.
Yeah, there was some weird glitch there. It could also be because things are uploaded through the network, some kind of network glitch. The entire file wasn't transmitted properly. So something went awry that first time. But no, I don't think it's something. I mean, the thing is, once you have one good run of Audyssey, unless you change your room, you don't really need to run it again. So as long as it works correctly once, if you're not changing things, then you're good.
I know, it's so crazy because you're thinking to yourself, oh, blah blah blah. You could lose that microphone and you would never know. You wouldn't find out for I have to actually know where mine is. In fact, I'm looking to make sure it's where I think it is because I have to use it all the time. So yeah, it's very irritating. I'm going to use it again too once I get these new panels in here. Even though they're the same size and shape as the panels I have on the walls, I'm still going to run it again because who knows. So he's got two subs, one just in front of his L-shaped couch on the left and one in the right rear corner of his room. The most recent run of Audyssey seemed to have improved how the bass sounds, but he can still localize his subs just a little bit. It's not bad. He's the only person in this house who can notice that also. Should he just live with it? Should he invest in a UMic 1? UMic 1 will not help you. So no. So they are not totally in the spaces that we would want them to be, but they are pretty good. Mm-hmm. Not bad. I would venture to say that either you're sitting close enough to that front sub that you are feeling it, and that's why you're localizing it. Try this. Take the crossovers for this and lower everything down to at least for the front speakers, down to 60 hertz. Okay. And if you can still localize it, it's not the subwoofer's placement. It's something else. I mean, well, it's not the subwoofer sound that's coming out. It's something else. Either it's shaking the couch and therefore, and you know where the subs are and therefore that's why you localize it. I find that just physically putting the sub further away from me psychologically makes me not be able to localize. But if I know it's right behind me, I just assume, my brain's it's all coming from right there, buddy. It's all coming from right there. I've had the sub behind my couch before. And even though I had two subs and whatever, I just couldn't not think it was coming from right there. By having other sounds kind of co-located with it, meaning it was up near one of my front speakers, it psychologically sort of told my brain, well, it's not. Other things are coming from there, therefore the bass is coming from everywhere. So I would try just switching the crossover just briefly to 60 hertz, and you could do it globally if you really wanted to, just to make sure that the sub wasn't playing anything that was localizable at all. 60 hertz is not localizable. It just isn't. So if you still can localize it, then it's your brain or something physical that is making the sub localizable to you, which I think is just that sub being that close to the couch and shaking the couch.
Yeah, it could definitely be that if you get a little bit more separation between that sub that's right up against the front of the L-shaped part of the couch, or maybe things aren't decoupled. You're getting physical vibration transfer. It could be through the floor if it isn't directly into the couch or into the wall right there. It could be through the floor, so decoupling might help there. It can also be the case that sometimes, even though you might have, maybe you gain matched the subs, as in you put them both in the same place to set their gains exactly the same so that the signal is responding the same. Some people recommend that as the starting point. I don't have a problem with that as the starting point. Maybe you SPL level matched them, but there's still that slight difference. Is not as though you're always in the exact same spot as where you measured to begin with. So I would point you to my 12-step guide going through that. If you don't want to do it all by ear, instead of spending as much as you might want, which isn't that bad. I mean, if you want to do it that way through Room EQ Wizard and have a visual representation and just instead of just relying on your ears, I wouldn't say no, but you could also just download. I would prefer to get an FFT on your phone. A real-time analyzer can work. It's not quite as good, but for the purposes that we're doing, it's fine. So either get a real-time analyzer or an FFT, which is a fast Fourier transform, so that you can see the graphs going on. And that way, as you are adjusting that front sub little by little, you can maybe lower its volume a little bit. You can maybe adjust the phase knob a little bit. You might be able to see in that RTA whether you're making the dips better or worse, and you can judge for yourself how localizable it is. I think this is going to be some subtle settings changes, and that's really all that needs to be done there.
Yeah, I like that. If you don't have the subs, on something smushy like the sound path isolation feet or the Subdued. I don't know what Auralex is calling that anymore, but
they're crazy overpriced anyway. The Auralex ones,
the Auralex ones have gotten really bad. There is over at AV Gadgets. There is a how to. There are platforms not made by Auralex that are exactly the same thing, and there's also these crazy like foam wedges that are ugly, but you can put them underneath your sub, and they're like made to stop the vibrations of like industrial washing machines from traveling into the floor. So it will 100% isolate your sub. That will not be a problem. And they're like $12 for 4 of them or something. It's ridiculously cheap. So get them. Get a piece of black cloth and wrap it around it or something, and just you'll never notice it. So he asked, "What is the mid-range compensation setting all about?" That's in the Audyssey app,
right?
That's that little
app,
dip. Yeah, that's that little dip right where right where the tweeter and the mid-range kind of tend to meet, right?
Often where that crossover is. I mean, as we mentioned before, it's basically a notch filter, even though it looks like a more visible dip in the graph that you see on the Audyssey editor app. It's in reality, it's much closer to a notch filter, which means that if you play a sweep, whether you turn that setting on or off, we've had a heck of a time ever audibly noticing whether that thing is on or off.
I've tried it myself. I turned it. I lived in my home theater for years, and then someone said something about this stupid notch, and I went, okay, well, I can turn that off. So I went and turned it off and went,
I hear no difference. Yes, if you are amongst the objectivist, I can see it in a measurement crowd and I don't want it there, I mean, go ahead and turn it off. We're not going to tell you there's anything wrong about turning it off because, like we said, audibly, we can't tell the difference. So if it just makes you feel better to turn it off and know that notch filter is no longer being applied, by all means, turn it off.
Right. I mean, it will make if it just makes you feel better, that's fine. So going by his SPL meter instead of just the audio settings, he would need to bump each of his speakers up 3 or 4 dB in their trim level. Should he do that or stick with Audyssey's auto settings? You should stick with Audyssey's auto settings. Are you putting your volume dial to 0 when you're doing your SPL meter thingy? Because there could be something with that. I'm surprised that you're finding that they are off by that much. 3 or 4 dB is,
I mean, the thing is your SPL meter an actual, like, separate handheld SPL meter, or is it the SPL meter on your phone?
If it's on your phone, well, we got a problem. Yeah. If it's an actual radio, like I have an actual Radio Shack old school one, and are you holding it in your hands? Yeah, because that will make a big difference. I know they're like, no, it won't. I'm like, dude, you don't even know. Yeah. Like I just remember the first time I did that. I used to sit there with my hand and like sit in the seat next to the seat I was trying to measure, and I'd put the thing up, hold it up right where it was supposed to be, pointing up in the whole 9 yards and blah blah blah. And then as I moved it towards me, I could see the meter.
Sure, yeah.
Just the needle bouncing around. I'm like, well, that's not good.
No, I mean,
that's when I started putting it on stands.
The fact that it's uniform, that he's like, all of my speakers would need to change by this amount. I'm like, that just sounds like the SPL meter was reading something at a I guess it would be lower level.
Right.
Yeah. So that's I would just pretty much trust the Audyssey one on that one. It usually gets levels bang on.
Yeah, that's not the hard part of this.
No.
So movies sound pretty great with things the way they are, but he uses YouTube Music for his streaming music content. I didn't even know that was a thing. I think I knew at one point, but the bass always sounds weak, but a simple increase of 4 to 6 dB on the subwoofer output seems to get it sounding right to him. Why is there this discrepancy between music and movies, and why the need to increase the subwoofer output level for music? YouTube compresses the crap out of everything.
I don't know. I don't know what the quality that YouTube Music specifically is sending. I'm not sure.
Don't either. But I'll tell you what. All the YouTube content creators that I watch complain about the compression algorithms. They film it all at like 1080p or 4K, and they say it does crazy things to it. I don't know if they're very transparent about what they're doing, but I guarantee you that if you're having bass issues, app to app, we can have these problems.
Right.
App to app, you can go and have volume difference. In my case, volume swings of up to 20, 30 dB, at least on the dial.
Yeah.
I'm going from like, I'll watch Disney movies at around 13, negative 12, negative 13, and I'll watch YouTube at negative 36. So that's just on the Xbox One. So it depends on what app you're using. There could be all kinds of things that are.
Honestly, I'm a little surprised that it went this direction, because usually in my experience, it's been that, because I tend to have Audyssey dynamic EQ turned on.
Sure.
And for most of the experiences that I've had, I end up with the volume dial for music lower, the master volume set lower than I have it for movies, because movies I get up fairly close to reference volume, which means that dynamic EQ is doing essentially nothing to the bass signal, whereas if I turn the master volume down, dynamic EQ is boosting the bass. So usually the balance of bass in music, if I leave dynamic EQ turned on, is that music sounds like the bass is too heavy. And I basically, for me, by switching dynamic EQ off, that fixes that. But he's saying that his music, the bass sounds quieter than it does for movies, so for my experience, that's a little bit surprising. Just the answer of why it's different. Well, music doesn't adhere to movie reference volume.
Right. There's that.
Every studio can pick whatever the heck they want. Every service can pick whatever the heck volume level they want. So yes, Tom's suspicion that it might just be YouTube Music that's doing something funky with the signal is certainly not out of the question whatsoever. As long as you know this is what you need to do, then it's not really the end of the world. You could even have just like a separate preset for that input that changes your subwoofer output settings. So yeah, I don't think there's a way to get it sounding uniform all the time across all content, because you just don't have a reliable standard to adhere to on that front.
Yeah. Like you said, it could be. There's a whole bunch of potential conflicts here. My thing is, if it works, then don't worry about it. Just bump it up 4 to 6 dB and go on with your life. Joe has a DefTech BP 9040 towers. That sounds like they probably have the powered woofers in them.
Yep.
And a CS 9060 center, which probably also has a powered woofer in it. But they all have amplifiers built in and self-powered bass woofers. So see, I should have kept reading there. Rather than connecting his receiver subwoofer output to them via RCA cables or running them full range, Joseph followed our advice, sent them all to small with 80 Hz crossover. He has a pair of SVS PB2000 Pro subs, and he isn't feeling like he's missing any bass by not running full range speakers up front. Good. But are those internal amplifiers still being used? Do they still supply power to the DefTech speakers even when you have them set to small and there's just a single run of speaker wire going to each speaker? He tried asking DefTech's customer service twice, but he seemed to know more about his speakers than they did, and they gave him 2 different answers. The manual is no help on the subject, so what's the deal? I thought that, now Rob's going to correct me or confirm what I say, I thought that you still needed to plug in the woofers. You needed to level match them somehow magically, which is very hard to do, with the rest of the speaker, because they did provide the bass past a certain range. But if you ran Audyssey without the subwoofers plugged in, it should have identified how low they were actually playing.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Right? So it would have said, if they were not reaching down to 80 hertz and without the amplifiers plugged in, or in use, I guess, without the whatever, then I would think it would have told you something, and you might have also seen in the graphs like a huge boost down that very low at the frequencies near 80 hertz, as it was trying to compensate for the fact that there was not a lot of output down there. That would be my guess. Go on, Rob.
So, I mean, you still want to plug those into the wall. You don't want to just run them completely passively. You still want to plug those speakers into the wall, and those bass drivers are still playing. They play all the way up to 350 hertz. So that is well above the crossover point. That is well above where if you were feeding them a dedicated subwoofer signal. So yes, those built-in amplifiers are absolutely still active. They are absolutely still part of what you're hearing. You're just applying a high-pass filter to the speakers and not having them try to play all the way down to 20 hertz and lower. You're just saying, okay, once you get down to 80, you can ease off. But those powered drivers are still responsible for the sound all the way up to 350 hertz. So yes, adjusting the volume dial on the back of them is still necessary, and it is a little bit tricky because it is going to be dependent on how close the speakers are to the boundaries of your room. It's going to depend on your room size. Doesn't depend tremendously on your distance from the speakers down at the bass frequencies, but room and placement of the speakers have an impact on that overall balance. So, my way of doing it is playing sweeps, sweeps on repeat, and lots of trial and error, and adjusting the volume on the back of those powered drivers until that sweep sounds as even as it can with the placement that you're limited to. You might still have a dip or something in there, or a hump. But that's the way I come at it, because there's no easy set it and forget it setting. If your speakers are farther away from the wall or closer to the wall, it's going to change where you end up with that volume dial set.
So I guess that's the thing that kind of threw me. If you had run it without the amplifiers plugged in, or with the amplifiers plugged in, Audyssey should have taken into account.
Did he say he has Audyssey, though? I mean, I don't know that he's even using.
You're right. You know what? I'm making a bunch of assumptions here, aren't I? Here. Well, yeah, he didn't say anything about what he's got.
No. So, yeah, I mean, if you're just doing manual speaker setup, that's the way I would come at it. Or if you want to bust out a real-time analyzer app on your phone and have a look on a graph and say, oh, hey, there is a huge lack of everything below 350 hertz. That'll be a clue. Or similarly, if there's a gigantic bump everywhere below 500 hertz, you'd be like, I probably need to turn the volume dials down on the back of it.
And this is where you don't really, like where we're talking about how holding it in your hand or whatever makes a big difference. This is one of the times when it really doesn't matter. All you're trying to do is get it like close. Yeah. So that line looks pretty flat down to 80. All right, Dave. Dave wants an AV receiver recommendation. Don't buy one. There's our recommendation. Don't buy it.
Wait a little bit.
Nothing's good. So he wants to run an 11-speaker setup. He says he only needs the receiver itself to have 7 amplifiers built in. Good luck with that. Obviously, pre-outs are needed for the rest. The catch is that he wants an XLR output for the subwoofer. Any suggestions? RCA to XLR cable is your recommendation, because 100%. It don't exist, Haas.
Well, I mean,
you could buy a preamp that has XLR outputs for everything, but you can't buy a receiver that has regular out. No receiver on the market that I can think of has an XLR output for a subwoofer.
I vaguely remember going back years ago when I think it was Emotiva when they had a receiver, because they don't anymore. They only have pre-pros. But I think there used to be an Emotiva receiver way back in the day that it had like XLR only for the subwoofer outputs. That's ringing a bell in my head. I don't know if I'm right about that, but that's like one of the only ones I could ever think of. But the honest answer is an RCA to XLR adapter is all you need. That'll work completely fine. I mean, the alternative is to have an RCA to XLR to RCA adapter on your subwoofer, right? Where you're running an RCA cable out of the AV receiver over the sub, and then you use an RCA to XLR adapter just on the subwoofer end. But either way, you do want to be a little bit careful with it, though, because it has to be wired correctly. So you want to find out what the pin connections are on the XLR input on your subwoofer's amplifier, and just make sure that the RCA adapter, because it's only going to be connected to 2 out of those 3 pins, because you just have the tip and the sleeve of the RCA, and you want to make sure that one is signal and one is ground, and those are going to the correct 2 pins on your XLR. Right. So you do need to be a little bit careful. Make sure you get the correct pin out, but that is the way to come in. And now, which AV receiver would we recommend? I mean, common refrain that you're going to be hearing for the next couple of months until we get the announcements that we're expecting in April and May of the 2021 models, because usually April, May is when the announcements start to trickle out of, they're not available to buy right then, but that's when the announcements start to come of the 2021 models. So for the next month or two, that's going to be a lot of what we're saying. But if you have to buy something right now, I would point you to a Denon X3700H, and that's kind of all you need. That's kind of all anybody needs in an 11-channel receiver.
Yeah, but getting a 7 amps built in, you're probably going to end up with 9, whether you like it or not.
Well, that Anthem, that MRX740 has it, but it doesn't have an XLR output for the subwoofer, so.
Right. Christian asks, would collectible plates displayed on shelves on the walls help or hurt the acoustics in a small theater? If you have 2 subwoofers, as we recommend, it will hurt them until the plates come off the walls, in which case then it will make a very scary noise, and then you can sweep them up and throw them away.
Lots of museum putty. Might be lots of museum putty in your future.
Yeah. So they are very reflective, and they are very easy to vibrate in my experience. Yes, museum putty will be your friend here. You will want to secure them into their little holder thingies very well. And
secure the little holder thingies to the shelf on which they sit.
Right. And just realize, I mean, they are reflective. Yeah. They're just as reflective as the walls are. So, if you're going to put them all on one spot, try to put them someplace where they're not going to be like at the first reflection point or right behind your head or something like that.
Yeah, I do not consider this diffusion replacement.
No.
I would quite strongly consider, like on the wall that is behind the plates, because a lot of times people, when they're displaying collectibles, they like to have a high contrast backdrop to them anyway, a dark color or a black, something like that. Some people put, black velvet behind their collectibles, and then they light them attractively. So if you're going to do that anyway, maybe consider having like 2 inches of insulation and then some, black covering, so that you actually have absorption on the walls. I still wouldn't consider these a replacement for a scatter plate or a diffusion panel, but So by themselves, I would say that collectibles are far more likely to hurt the sound than to help it, and I don't really consider them a help to the sound in any scenario.
It would be like, adding, if I added windows to my home theater, would that make it sound better or worse? Well, I mean, I'm sure he was picturing, maybe their diffusion, because he's going to have them at little angles and stuff like that, but not really. Nah, not really. Chris just moved into a new house. Congratulations, Chris. There's a dedicated room that will be the media theater room. No plans for full soundproofing construction, but he was thinking about putting in a solid core door. There seems to be a substantial gap at the bottom of the door. He knows that this gap often acts as an air return for the HVAC unit and shouldn't be sealed. However, the HVAC unit has 7 air filters throughout the house, including one in the theater room, as opposed to a single large central air filter. Do these vents/filters act as the return air return for the HVAC unit, and would it be okay to seal the underside of the new solid core door for some additional sound reduction? If you see only one place where air is and it's air blowing out, no matter if there's a filter there or not, that's the air in. So that's air out is going to be someplace else. Yeah. So my guess would be that no, you cannot. I mean, you need to find 2 holes and then make sure that one of them is not blowing out when the AC is on. Right. And that would be your air return in that room if it existed. It almost certainly does not. So, no.
Yeah, I mean, something with a filter, because typically your air supply, you don't see a filter on the register. So usually if there's something with a filter, I would expect that to be the air return. It's not necessarily the case. Maybe your system happens to have filters on the supply, but that tends to be a bit more unusual. But yeah, I mean, in order for this to work, Chris, the simple answer is there has to be 2. There has to be a supply and a return. And then if you've got 7 of these and they are returns and they're spread around your house, likely the one that's inside your planned theater room is also acting as the return for what's ever on the other side of that door if it's got a big gap under it. Which means that maybe,
I didn't think about that.
Yeah, maybe inside the theater itself you would be okay sealing that gap, but whatever's on the other side of that door no longer has the return that it's supposed to have, and now that air starts to get real stale and problematic, or you have heat problems in whatever's on the other side of that door. So I mean, we don't know. We're not HVAC professionals. I would strongly recommend consulting with an HVAC professional because it might be fine. I don't know, but I suspect that it isn't. I certainly I wouldn't advise you to go sealing the gap under your door without consulting somebody. I would recommend consulting somebody more knowledgeable than us.
Eric, we've recently had several questions about 2.35 to 1 aspect ratio screens and anamorphic lenses for projectors. Eric has noticed how a number of recent shows and movies, Mandalorian, WandaVision, Westworld, most of Christopher Nolan's movies utilize changing aspect ratios. Dude, watching WandaVision change the aspect ratio over and over again gave me a perverse pleasure knowing that all these 2.35 to 1 people were just like going bonkers because it was like...
Or missing it entirely. I mean, if they got really good velvet blacked out on the top and bottom, that they just missed it entirely.
I just made me so happy. Made me so happy. It did. I know that's mean, but it was such an integral part of the show.
Right.
You know, it showed you
that's exactly what Eric is talking about.
Was. I just love it. So he says it, and it isn't just because different cameras were used. It's actually part of the storytelling, which is true. That's not so much true with like the Dark Knight. I think he just
that was more the cameras were changing. Yeah,
that was the cameras were changing. But yes, WandaVision for sure. I haven't seen much of Westworld. And I remember the Mandalorian changing, but it was like when they wanted to have those big wide shots. I don't know that we'll call that for storytelling. So do we foresee that trend continuing? And if so, do we think more people will come around to our way of thinking, which is to always install a 16:9 screen? Dude, they're already to our way of thinking. Right. Everybody who buys a flat panel is buying a 16:9 screen, which is why they can do the kind of stuff they're doing. Do I think we'll see more storytelling that involves changing aspect ratios? It made so much sense in WandaVision. Like, I don't know about Westworld and some of these other ones. Like The Mandalorian, I liked when they did it because it gave you that sort of that real, Star Wars, massive black bars with these huge vistas. I did like it. I didn't think it was necessary. WandaVision was 100%. That was it was practically a character in the story. So that was big. Do I think we'll see more of it? No. I mean, relatively, I think we'll see about the same percentage as we're seeing right now, which is you can pick out a handful of things that have happened in the last 10 years or that have had it, and that'll be it. And I think it'll stay that way because it's just... I
mean, you don't think that...
For the most part, not necessary.
You don't think that the Roku channel buying all that Quibi content is going to mean we need vertical screen stop?
That Roku channel is going to have a hard time getting my money. I'm going to put it to you that way. I am uninterested in that Roku channel.
Yeah, I don't know how much I think it'll continue in trend. I think it depends on the content creator, right? It depends on the directors and the cinematographers and whether this is something they want to keep doing.
I could see more Disney content happening with Wanda,
and because they're so focused on Disney Plus, like so crazy focused on that. Yeah, I could see that.
I don't expect it to happen in Falcon and Winter Soldier at all. But I think that you might see it happen again when we get to like the Wanda part of because I think that
and something like Multiverse
I have
of
a bunch
Madness,
of theories.
right? Doctor Strange.
That's exactly what I was going to say. I have a lot of that could fit in there really well. But we won't know until we know what the story is. I mean, I have a lot of I've been like doing my due diligence on the background for like the Darkhold and some of these other things that they introduced in WandaVision, kind of getting my own idea based on what the characters they've already introduced for the I can't say this stupid. Anyway, the new Doctor Strange movie. And I could see it happening there. Now, do I see it happening in the next Avengers movies? No. Do I see it happening in the Black Widow movie? No. I see most things not needing it. Why would you need this? You pick a style of photography for the entire movie and you film the entire movie that way. That's what Christopher Nolan mostly did. And then he was like, oh, well, these one couple of shots here, I can use some IMAX cameras and get some more out of it. He still filmed it at least, the shot is still framed as if it were in the 2.35 to 1, which is the rest of the movie is, but then there's extra on the top and bottom for those couple of scenes.
That's kind of the reverse for Dunkirk, where over 70% is the IMAX, and it's only the few 70 millimeter shots that are wider. I mean, so yeah, Eric, honestly, we have a completely inordinate amount of people who even know what 2.35 to 1 is writing in on this show compared to the vast population of people. The number of people with a projector is tiny. Then the number of people with a 2.35 to 1 screen instead of 16:9 is a tiny subset of what is already a tiny group of people. It's no wonder that, of course, they are excited about it and vocal about it, because that's the thing that they're really into. But I don't think there are nearly enough people with 2.35 to 1 only projection screens to have any sort of impact on the people over at Disney Plus who are saying, I'm going to change this aspect ratio. Maybe I shouldn't because of those 2.35 to 1 aspect ratio screen owners. Nope, they are not thinking about that at all. So if they want to, they're going to, and 16:9 is the way to go.
So he says, if you happen to be someone who enjoys listening to music at extremely high volume levels and you don't have to worry about potentially bothering neighbors, wouldn't a high wattage amplifier be a good idea? In his experience, he's noticed a cleaner sound after adding a separate high wattage amp, but he's listening at a volume that's just below the point where his eardrums start to distort, let alone the speakers. What are our thoughts? Well, it depends on how far away you are from the speakers.
My very first thought is, please be careful.
Yeah.
Because that scares me.
I was just listening to some an audiologist on the radio, and he was talking about how much hearing loss we all have based on things we've done in the past, including going to concerts, having headphones on way too loud, doing all these other things. You know, if you have even the tiniest bit of ringing after you have listened to something, you are hearing your hearing die. That there is something dying. There's some part of your hearing that you will no longer have anymore after that experience. And that's just the fact. That's just the way that is. So if you are listening at that level, I would say stop.
Yeah.
Don't do that anymore. And no, don't buy another amplifier, because clearly you need to turn it down. But so what does the higher wattage amp do in this scenario is if you are getting to the point where the amplifiers within your receiver are starting to distort or clip because you are pushing it too hard, then the higher wattage amp will not clip or
it gives
distort.
you more headroom.
But you can fix both of those things by A, turning it down, which is what you should do, B, sitting closer to your speakers so that you don't have to turn it up as loud to get the same relative volume, or C, just buying headphones and stop being a weirdo. So, I mean, that's just...
But I mean... As we have said in other responses, I mean, this is a math problem when you break it down. This is a matter of how far you are from the source, at what volume level you're listening, the sensitivity of the speakers, and that will determine how many watts are necessary to apply to all that. So, I mean, we have recommended to some people, it's not very many, because the majority of people, when you do the math, don't need more wattage than what they already have. But in the instances where it does make sense, that is where we recommend it. So, I mean, we're pretty cut and dry on when we recommend external amplification or not. It's not a matter of taste or wanting it. It's a math problem. So when the math says get a higher wattage amp, we'll tell you to get a higher wattage amp.
And in your case, you can also look at your speakers and say, okay, if I get a horn-loaded speaker, suddenly I don't need that amp. If you just want to buy the amp, buy the amp. No one's going to stop you. But
I did.
Please turn it down.
Yes.
Nick says, if you're building a totally dedicated theater, going for a JVC projector and painting all the walls dark, maybe not matte black, but a lot darker than a normal room, how important is the color of the floor? He's going to have a thick rug between his front row and the screen, and the rug could be dark, but the installed flooring will likely be hardwood and probably a lighter color. Will that negatively affect the image, and would it be beneficial to go with wall-to-wall carpet instead? He read that full carpeting can actually throw off the balance of your frequency response. Who said that? Since it kills the highest... Who said that? Since
Anthony
it kills the highest
frequencies.
frequencies.
video.
But isn't it really broadband absorption? So bottom line, what should he do for his floor? Doesn't matter. Okay, so It does not kill. Wall-to-wall carpeting does not kill your high frequencies. Whoever said that is on PCP or something. I don't know. That's crazy. That's not the case. I can't imagine what kind of flooring you would have to. It would have to look like an anechoic chamber, but the ceiling was on the floor in order for it to kill your high frequencies. I mean, that's just insane. But yeah. So no. Rob's going to tell you dark is better. That's fine. So what's the real problem here? So can the light reflecting around your room go back to your screen and distort or somehow affect the colors that you're seeing? Answer, yes. In practical terms, how often is this really a problem? It's very unlikely to be noticeable by most people in most situations, unless the colors that are being reflected are extremely vivid. Like, it's like I have a hot pink room and now all my whites look hot pink. Well, okay, that can happen. So, but if you have like a normal neutral color floor, like a brownish or something like that, I don't really see there being a huge issue. A darker color wall, sure. My walls are orange. Okay, now that sounds terrible, but they're like a burnt umber, I don't know, somewhere between orange and red, but it's very dark. And when you turn the lights off, the walls look black. And when you turn the projector on, the walls still look black. They don't really look orange as the light's reflecting around the room. So I haven't really noticed any problems in my room. I'm going to say I do plan on painting it gray in here. I just can't be bothered to do it because it requires moving furniture and stuff.
Yep, it's a hassle.
But yeah, I mean, I would get a neutral colored carpet that was maybe a little bit on the dark side. I would get whatever the thickest pad is they offer for installation underneath, just for a tiny bit more absorption and comfort. And then I would actually not spend too much on the carpet. I'll be honest.
But what if he would prefer the hardwood floor and he's just gonna have a rug in between?
Yeah, just get a nice neutral dark colored rug. Yeah.
Yeah,
with the pad.
So I mean, in the purest objectivist, format, then like every surface in the theater would be, completely non-reflective black for the absolute best performance that a 1.0 gain, screen could possibly give you from that JVC projector. But in real life, I mean, in particular, if you're already going to the effort of darkening your walls, darkening your ceiling, limiting how reflective they are, not going for high gloss, then if you think about, what does the light path have to take in order for the reflected light to get back onto the screen, right? If all of your walls are bright white and high gloss, and your floor is also light in color and high gloss, then it's pretty easy to imagine how, whatever angle the light is coming from the projector off the screen, it's bouncing off of all of those surfaces, and it's going to get back onto the screen and wash out your image. If the only surface in your theater that's a little bit lighter in color is your floor, then, most of that light gets reflected off the floor onto a wall, onto the ceiling. And if that's where that reflection dies, it doesn't really make it back to your screen. So, living in the real world, if this is what makes more sense for the rest of the house and what you want to do, I have no problem having a lighter colored hardwood floor. And yeah, that is totally fine.
Right. All right, Nick. Nick says
Still
if you're... Oh, it's still Nick, sorry. Scroll. Since his theater won't be built until this summer, it makes sense to wait and see what gets announced in the way of new projector and AV receiver models, correct? Do we think there might be delays for the new Denon models? Do we think they'll have HDMI 2.1 sorted out this year? And what about JVC projectors? When the 4K NX models came in, they kept the eShift X790 around at a nicely discounted price for a while. Do we think the same thing might happen this year with, say, the NX7? I thought they already... Didn't they already? We already talked about the JVC. I thought it was just a firmware update that they did this year, or maybe.
Well, I mean that was at the tail end of 2020,
right?
So we don't know if there's going to be new models at the end of 2021. We don't know.
Okay, so we don't know. We have no insider information here. I'm a little hesitant to say that I think that they might come out with something new and amazing this year. I think that there's been a lot of supply chain issues. There's been a lot of the AKM fire. That there's a lot of things that have happened in the last year, pandemic related and not, that are going to affect electronics for the next 2 to 3 years.
Plus, it's like Sony did release new projector models in 2020, but they're not really threatening JVC's existing lineup that they have right now. Like if Sony had really kind of one-upped them, then I might see JVC stepping on it, but I'm like, they're not really being threatened by their number one competitor. So yeah, normally I would feel more confident and think that there would be new models because it's been 3 years and that's the typical life cycle of projectors. But if the JVC projectors were delayed and we don't see any new models until 2022, I would not be shocked at all with what's gone on.
Right. And the receivers too, I know that one's really tough to tell. That one I don't really know. I think if I'm going to put on my prediction hat right now, I think the next year we're going to see, more HDMI 2.1, inputs on the Denons, but not a full suite of them. And I think that Yamahas are going to be around the same what they were this year. I don't think that we're going to see a ton more. I think that we're not going to see until the next year a full suite, like all the HDMI inputs are 2.1. And maybe not even then. It might be 2 years from now. It might be 2023 before we really see them.
You really think that? I don't think it'll be later than 2022, but 2021 is questionable to me.
I don't see it happening this year for sure. Yeah. I think 2022 is I could see them going like 5 of the 7 inputs, and then you know what I mean?
I could see even just 3.
Yeah. Well, I was thinking for 2022.
Oh, for 2022. Okay.
Yeah, 5 of the 7, or something along those lines. Not a full sweep, but pretty close, with a couple of like ones that are, just for Zone 2 or something like that.
I mean, regardless, for Nick specifically, there is no harm in you waiting on both of these things, because I mean, if you get to the point where like, my theater's constructed, it's all done, I'm ready to put something in here, we still haven't heard anything about new Denon models and new JVC projectors, then I'm like, well, you're going to buy something anyway. But the longer you wait, the better the chance is that you will hear something, and there's no downside to waiting. The prices aren't going to go up, so there's no downside to waiting.
Yeah. Nick and his wife are moving.
This is a different Nick. The last one was
Nick.
Wait a
second, I'm going insane here. I keep saying Nick.
2 people can be named Nick. One had last name B, one had the last name A. So this is Nick A.
That sound was my kids breaking dishes, in case you're wondering what that sound was.
I didn't hear it.
Well, somebody probably did and freaked out. It was my kids. It wasn't yours. Nick, different Nick, and his wife are moving into a new home. Dude, everybody's moving to new homes. Congratulations, all you guys.
Yeah.
It's a new home episode.
Spring is here and new homes abound.
The neighbors across the street are selling their home right now, moving back to North Carolina. I wouldn't have moved to North Carolina, I'll be honest with you. I'd move to North Carolina right now. I'd have to move someplace. Asheville is where I would move, honestly, if I had the option. Naturally, his first order, except they have a lot of hills, and I've been cycling in Florida where there's no hills. I don't think I could take it. I'll be honest with you. My bike only has 9 gears, and it's not enough to go over some overpasses around here, because my lowest gear, I can barely get into it, and it's just not enough. I'm struggling. I'm telling you. I have to take a drink of water because I made a funny voice. All right. Nick and his wife are moving into a new house. Naturally, his first order of business is to plan the home theater area. That should not be your first order of business, but you have made your choice, and now you must live with it. It's an L-shaped room. You have chosen poorly. Sorry. The TV will be mounted on the wall at the toe of the L. There will be a sideways-facing couch on the left, a sideways-facing couch on the right, and a love seat directly facing the TV. The love seat will be 14 feet away, and the rest of the L-shaped room is open behind the love seat to the rear left of the love seat. So this does make sense the way he said it, which is good because it's a hard thing to describe, and he did very well with it. So there is an L-shaped, and then it's open to a kitchen. It says it's not, but it is.
Well,
so it's also.
I don't know. I mean, that might be up like a pocket door.
I think that's a pocket door. I would call that very flimsy. That thing's going to vibrate like crazy if you try to pressurize the space. So. Did he give us dimensions? He didn't.
No.
The love seat will be 14 feet from or the rest of the L shape. Okay, with that. He'll be bringing his 65-inch LG C8 OLED Denon X3700H receiver, BK Electronics 12-inch sub, and super slim KEF T101 on-wall surround speakers from their old place. But the compromise for having the theater set up in the living room is that the tower or bookshelf speakers are totally out of the question. The front speakers have to either be in-wall or on-wall. In the old place, he had KEF R-Series front speakers, and he loved them. KEF doesn't seem to have any on-wall models that would equal the R-Series, but they do have R-Series in-walls, which are the THX Ultra certified. They also have THX Select certified in-walls that are smaller, considerably less expensive, and seem to use the Q-Series drivers. So he's become enamored with potentially getting, jeez, man, why do they have to name them like this? CI3160R in-walls. Remember that, guys, okay? Gals. CI, it's capital C, little I, in case you want to write it down. The R at the end is big. But at $2,000 each, they're expensive, not completely out of the question, but close to it. Also, their size would demand that the center would have to go above the TV rather than below. The THX Select CI4100Q at $600 each is way more affordable. And small enough for the center to go below the TV, but he's concerned that coming from the R-Series fronts, he'll find them disappointing. And he's got some pictures here, which if you're on YouTube, you can see. First of all, I'm really concerned about that fireplace, but let's go on. What are our opinions, and are there any alternatives we might suggest? So first of all, price aside, I don't have any problems with you putting a center above a TV any more than I do below it. In fact, I think I might suggest putting the center above the TV regardless because of the stupid fireplace that's right there.
Fireplace and the distance that you're sitting. Yeah, I have no problem with your center being above the television in this instance, none at all.
There's a couple of things to really be concerned. Is this a fire? I mean, I don't know where you moved. I'm assuming North Carolina since that's where I want to go. But are you actually using said fireplace? And does it give off heat, or is it actually just for looks? Because some of these things are just kind of pretty and they don't really give off that much heat, because you really need to consider mounting, where your mounting options are here for this TV, because if it's too close, you're just going to burn that thing up, and it's going to
and plus, even if it's an electric fireplace, there's usually some kind of heating thing, like some kind of flue going up the back of that. And I mean, if that's going to be right in the path of where your center speaker wants to go, you might not even have the option of installing a center speaker full stop
at all. Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's not as though those exhaust tubes are always centered on these types of fireplaces. Sometimes they are off to one side, and you do have that central path, and maybe there is room for the center speaker. But this is something to check on before you go buying speakers with the intention of installing them. Make sure that it is possible to install said speakers. The front left and right should be doable, though.
Right.
You could just have a Phantom.
Yeah. So this is what I'm going to suggest. So he's looking at $1,800 for 3 up front for the smaller ones, and something like $6,000 for the other one.
That's right.
So there's a huge difference in price here, but he very much wants the bigger speakers. I'm going to say if you want the bigger speakers, forego the center.
Okay.
Full stop.
Yeah.
And which it might not even be an option, like Rob said. And just do the Phantom center. It's a long, thin thing. You can cheat them out a little bit wider than you maybe normally would, so that you have a wider sweet spot in between. Your left and right couches that are going to be in use here, they were never going to get the good sound anyways. No. So
and he cares about the love seat that's facing the TV. That's his primary concern. Yeah.
Don't worry about that. Just make sure that these things are at least as wide as the love seat's arms.
Yeah.
And a little bit wider than that would be fine too. What is going on?
I don't know, but he said, are there any alternatives that he might consider? Yes, there is KEF's own CI200R, which, it's basically if you take the 3160, remove the extra bass driver and the passive radiator, and you just have the centralized concentric driver, that is what the 200R is. You can get rectangular looking grills for it because it's by normal it's a square shape because it's just the concentric driver, and you're like, maybe I don't want squares just from the way that it looks. But you can get rectangular grills from KEF to make it look like rectangles on the outside if it was purely a visual thing. So those go for $800 each, so it's a little bit more than the Q series ones you were looking at, but much less than $2,000. $2,000 each. So yeah, I would very much consider those, because those are the R series drivers that you wanted. The other thing you could do is, if installing the center speaker is just a no-go because of the way that fireplace is and what might be in the back there, then you do have the option of going for one of KEF's on-wall passive speaker bars. They actually talk about, with like the HTF 8000 one, how you can just like connect all three of its things as the center and just use it as a long, skinny center that mounts on the wall instead of in the wall. So KEF, I'm not going to be pointing you to something different than KEF. I'm just pointing you at potentially different models from KEF that might solve some of these issues.
Okay. I would definitely take a look at some on-wall models as well. There are lots of mounts that you can get for the speakers that you like, right? I mean, you might not want to have big speakers up there. You might want to have on-walls, which would be fine. But there's a lot of on-wall options out there. I was trying really quickly while Rob was talking. There's like something weird going on with my window, so I got to get up. It's like howling. It was very strange. But I was looking at Legacy Audio for their on-wall options.
Yeah, they're expensive though, man. That is
they
not
are
cheap.
From what I could tell, the silhouettes are probably, and I think those are very expensive.
I think those are $2,700 each. I think. Yeah. So even more.
Yeah. So, but there are other options out there. RBH has some. I'm not sure if they would be appropriate.
On-wall. I mean, they got the Ultra series, but that's not quite up to this level.
Right. So, I mean, don't limit your. I mean, I know you like KEF, but don't necessarily limit yourself just to this simply because. I don't even know if you're going to be able to install in walls. In some, like you have put them exactly where you want them to look on the wall, and you haven't. Have you moved into the house yet? Have you checked to see where the studs are? Is this even an option? I mean, is that an exterior wall, which means there may be a fire break in there and that you can't do any of this stuff? And then running wire to it, especially if it's exterior wall and you have a more shallow roof like we do here in Florida, you can't get to it. You can't get over there to drill a hole into the headboard so that you can fish that wire down. So now you're looking at hiding the wire in the room somehow in order to get it over there. You may not even have the options that you think you do. Right. So, if it comes down to all this, and you find out you run into some of these problems, like do all of the planning first before you buy the speakers.
Yeah, don't go buying. Yeah.
You got to know where the studs are. You got to know that you can get speaker wire to it. You have to have a plan for all of that before you even think about getting an in-wall speaker. On-walls are just freestanding speakers on the shelves or something up front, which can look very nice. They can look fine. You don't have to get, you don't have to get massive bookshelf speakers. You can put those up there, and then now you just have some shelves up there that have some speaker wire coming out from behind them, maybe running up a little track in the corner or something, or up underneath it that you paint the same color as the wall. So he says he'd like to install in-ceiling Atmos speakers as well for a 5.1.4 configuration. Obviously, there are KEF in-ceiling models, but even the least expensive options are about $125 each. We've often said how almost any speakers will do for Atmos, so would some Polk RC60s for about $60 each be perfectly fine? I mean, probably. I mean, why wouldn't you just get the mono price ones that we suggest?
Well, because he's in the UK, I'm assuming, by that BK Electronics sub.
Right.
I wouldn't import mono price to the UK because that kills the pricing advantage. For Atmos, I mean, Polk is pretty much never my favorite, but for Atmos, it's going to be fine. I don't really have any issue with it for just Atmos speakers.
Right. And, like you said, we've said it many times before, just about any speaker works for Atmos. And the reason we say that is because there's a very small percentage of the frequency range that is actually being played by Atmos speakers. We think, and, there's evidence that there has been a heavy amount of DSP in order to apply to it in order to give you sort of a head-related transfer function going on with that. And we don't know what's going on, but all we know is that it doesn't have to timbre match crap. So yes, anything will do. Will says he knows we've explained them before. All right, then let's skip you. Ari. No, sorry, Will. Will says he knows we've explained them before, but could we please go over it again? What do Audyssey Dynamic EQ, Dynamic Volume, and LFC do? Okay. Dynamic EQ is applies equal loudness curves to your bass response, so that as you turn down the volume from reference, which you'll never have it at because it's too loud, turn it down. As you turn it down, the relative how you experience the bass, how you hear the bass, as the bass gets lower, you get less sensitive to bass. So dynamic EQ makes it so that it is the same subjective volume to the rest of the frequency range, which means it adjusts the volume of the bass up slightly, depending on how low you go.
To a point, there's also, if you turn the volume way down, you will subjectively experience the bass being much louder than everything else, because the other thing dynamic EQ does is attempt to keep everything audible. So along with our hearing being nonlinear, it's also nonlinear in the threshold of audibility for frequencies, and the lower we go in frequency, the higher the decibel level has to be for us to detect it at all. So in order to try and keep all the sounds both audible and as close relatively as they can be to subjective equal volume when you turn down the master volume, then dynamic EQ is applying curves as you turn down the master volume to try and keep everything audible.
Right. Dynamic volume is more like compression, basically.
It's dynamic range compression. Yeah.
Keeps the same volume for everything. So when your commercials blow you out of the water and wake you up when you're sleeping on the couch on a Sunday afternoon, dynamic volume will stop that. In theory, stop that from happening. So that's, basically, so you won't get these massive peaks. A train goes by and it's really loud in the movie. It will make it be as loud as everything else, which is nice when you're trying to, be respectful of other people in the house who are sleeping, or if you yourself are going, I don't want to be woken up and I know I'm taking a nap, so I'm going to turn this on. This will help. I used to do that all the time.
Yeah, it shrinks the difference between the quietest sounds and the loudest sounds. It makes the quiet sounds a little louder. It makes the loud sounds a little quieter, so that everything is closer to being the same volume.
And LFC is a low frequency control, I think that's what this is.
Yeah, low frequency containment, supposedly.
It just turns basically down your bass.
All it is a high pass filter. It just rolls off the bass to increasing amounts as you turn up the value of LFC. It is nothing fancy. It is just a filter that rolls off the bass.
All right, Ari. Ari just finished his basement. There's a small room, 11.5 by 15.5, with the minimum allowable ceiling height, which is probably 7.5 feet, maybe 7.
More like 6'8", it looks like, because these are just above his doors.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
Okay. The room can be closed off, but it isn't completely dedicated to being a theater. It'll be a bit of a family room, and they don't want the home theater set up to dominate the way everything looks. He put insulation in the walls and sealed up openings for basic soundproofing, and acoustic treatments will take the form of rugs, curtains, a stuffed couch, and hopefully some acoustic panel posters. There you go. The front wall has shelves built in and an exterior door on the left that won't ever get used. Okay, he's thinking the TV will either be a 65-inch or 75-inch, and he's pre-wired for 5.1. So he's got hardwood floors, or maybe not. Maybe they're
laminate, probably, being a basement.
Yeah. It's got like a heat thingy on the one long wall. He's got, I can't really tell. Anyways, so he already owns a pair of ELAC Unify bookshelf and the matching center speaker, plus the ELAC Debut Sub 3010, which is their 10-inch model that specs down to 28 hertz. His initial plan was to get the ELAC Unify towers to go up front and call it a day, but then his dad bought a pair of KEF LS50 speakers, and now Ari is wondering if he should upgrade all his speakers, even though he has no complaints about his ELACs. What do we think he should do in the way of speakers, and would it make sense to go beyond 5.1 in this room with its low ceiling? The ceiling has absolutely nothing to do with 5.1.
Well, I mean, he's thinking Atmos. He's got this low ceiling. Yeah. Should he try for Atmos speakers?
There's no reason why you can't. I mean,
I also think when this isn't a fully dedicated theater, that's not my priority. I mean, that means having to buy a more expensive receiver too. So I'm not in favor of that.
You're still gonna end up with at least the ability to put 2 overhead speakers in in your system no matter what. So you will have the option of testing it out, regardless of, because right now it's just
fine at stopping at 5 speakers in here.
Yeah. So, I mean, first of all, do you really, really love the LS50s? Because if you really, really love the LS50s, well, you should get the LS50s. And I would just take the bookshelves that you have and throw them in the back.
Make them the surrounds.
Make them the surrounds, and then keep the center channel up there with the LS50s, and then see how it goes. Mm-hmm. Because LS50s are not a cheap speaker, even on sale. They're like a $1,000 or $1,100 from Accessories for Less. So, though they do sell them new for $1,500, if you want to buy them new, they still have the new ones there. At least they did last week when I was looking at them. So, yeah, I mean, I have no problems with you going either way on this. If you just wanted to get I don't see why you need the towers, because this is not that big of a space, 11.5 by 15.5.
Yeah, it's not for that. It's because, like, if we're thinking that TV takes up, like, it's going to be going in front of those sort of central shelves that only come part way up the wall, that his TV is going to be mounted in front of that. It's like, where do the left and right speakers go? They pretty much have to stand on the floor in some way. Right. So you're either going to have towers or bookshelf speakers on stands. So I'm not like angry at the idea of towers in here, because it's like, yeah, it's going to have to stand in front of that door. It's going to have to stand in front of those shelves that are on the right. So in that sense, it kind of makes sense. Right. But you are paying for a premium for essentially an integrated stand. Yeah. Because the output and the bass extension that you'll get out of the tower, which is greater than what you would get from a bookshelf speaker, you do not need. Right. That's not what you're going to need. So you could get a more expensive bookshelf speaker, or the same expensive or slightly less expensive bookshelf speaker that has slightly higher quality sound quality, and then a stand to put it on, and you would have spent the same amount of money, but you would have gotten a better sounding speaker. So So I mean, my instinct for what I would do in his shoes, I would keep your front 3 speakers that you already have. I'd get a pair of stands that you can put the bookshelves that you already have as your front left and right. I would very much consider ELAC's on-wall speakers for the surrounds, because they're less expensive, and it definitely looks like you have left and right walls. So those OW42s that ELAC has, I would match those up, because he's not even coming from Debut or Debut 2.0 front. He's got Unify, which are really good, really good. So I wouldn't bother upgrading the front 3s, but I'd add some of those Debut series on walls as my surrounds. And then with the money that I saved by not buying towers or 5 all new speakers, I might upgrade to either. I'd at least add 1 more sub, if not replace the sub you have with 2 better ones. I would consider that. I'd consider a subwoofer upgrade. I could see that. I do like those ELAC on-wall speakers. Sure. I think those are quite nice. They do get some pretty good reviews as well. Yeah. And before anybody says, "What about the last listener?" They're not quite appropriate for what he was going there with a 14-foot viewing distance, talking about on walls. These are very appropriate as surrounds, particularly in a small room, but they wouldn't match like KEF R series as front speakers. So right. And then we didn't talk about it, but I guess this week I was doing some searches for something. I was trying to find. Remember that guy who gave us the idea to use the flour sack movie posters from Ghana? Yeah. And I did the search for that, and I found this place I guess it's in Seattle, hometheaterseattle.com, that sells acoustic movie posters. Have we ever talked about them before? Not that I recall. No. So they apparently have licensed a whole bunch of movie posters that you can buy from them. Now, they're not cheap. They're $200 a poster. Right. They are they have perfectly reasonable installation inside. It's the Owens Corning 703 or whatever. They're 2 foot by 3 foot. Yeah, and it's only an inch thick. Yeah, and it's only an inch thick. So what I would do with them if I got them is I would stand them off the wall at least an inch, if you could. That would at least get them to be performing as if you had a 2-inch panel that was flush to your wall. So those are a really good option. So you can check those guys out. We'll have the link in the show descriptions. They look fine from what we can see, but we've never tested them. So, but they look pretty good. If you buy from them, make sure you told them that you got it from us, and then tell us that we did that, and then we'll mention you as our listener of the week. Anything else for this guy? I think that covers it. Yeah.
Jacob. Jacob says renovation is beginning on his basement. The theater room will be 15 by 25 by 9. So we'll be using an ultra-short throw projector with a 120-inch screen on the 15-foot wall. So it's going to be wider than this.
No, it's going to be longer. It's 25
longer.
Feet
That's
long.
right. Sorry. My brain is not. I don't think I ate lunch. The theater area, seating area, couch facing the screen, sideways facing love seat on the left, sideways facing chairs on the right, will basically take up the front half of the 25-foot long room. So he's going to put his couch smack dab in the middle of the room.
Pretty close to it by the diagram. Yeah. It's pretty close to it. Yeah.
There's an exterior door on the left wall behind the seating area, and the door into the room is in the right rear corner. So this is all hand-drawn. So
it is.
It is.
But it gives a rough idea.
So he's using a Denon X3500H receiver and going for a 5.2.2 setup. He intends to continue using his DefTech towers and center up front. Subs will be a pair of SB2000 Pros. And in his diagram, he's positioned one of them on the front wall just to the inside of his front right tower, and the second sub on the left wall just slightly behind the midway point, so they're not across the entire room from one another. His main question is about his proposed surround and Atmos speaker placement. He was planning on getting 4 SVS Prime elevation speakers. 2 of them would go basically directly to the left and right side of his couch as surrounds. Then the other 2 would also go on the side walls, but a few feet in front of his couch, and those would be his Atmos speakers. He isn't sure what to label them. What are our suggestions as far as the speaker layout goes? Can I say I don't like any of it? Can I just start with that? I mean, the left and right seem to be, and the center seem to be okay, but the rest of it I don't like.
Well, even those, I'm not quite sure why they're, I mean, in his diagram, it's all hand-drawn, but, I mean, it's not completely accidental, like, why his left and rights are shifted to the left of the room. I mean, there's nothing really in that front right corner that demands that the front right speaker be in from the wall and the front left not be in from the wall. So I don't know, maybe that was purely just drawing in a hurry, but I'm not sure why everything is shifted to the left a little bit, because I
don't either. Maybe there's a bulkhead someplace or something like that.
The couch doesn't appear to be shifted to the left. Yeah, there's could be something in that corner because we're just seeing a hand-drawn diagram of it. Yeah, there are changes I would make to this. This isn't the way.
So I would equally place my speakers to the left and right of my screen to start with. I don't know why your front left is in the corner and your front right is like 2 or 3 feet in from the corner. So I would equally place those. If you absolutely want to leave your subwoofer there, I would take the other subwoofer and put it on the back wall, but I can't tell what's back there with all that.
I think there's probably going to be like a sink or a bar area or something like that, because it looks like that's.
So what you really should do is you should take your subwoofers and put them across each other on the midways of the side walls. Is what
I think so.
Do.
Yeah, I mean like where
I don't see any reason why you can't.
Where he's got the subwoofer on the left-hand wall, I would just put the other subwoofer on the right-hand wall directly across from it, the midpoints of the 2 side walls, the 25-foot long walls.
Yeah. So SB2000 Pros, they should work in this room. They're going to be. It's a pretty big room for them, but it should be okay. I would take, as far as your Atmos speakers, I would. So your proposed left and right surrounds being near the ceiling on either side, fine. That's fine.
Okay.
I would take your front. I would take your other prime elevations, put them directly above your front left and right speaker on the ceiling, right near the ceiling.
Oh, okay.
There.
Just call them front heights?
Front heights. And then I would take the other ones and I'd put them on your ceiling behind you in line with your front left and right speakers.
Well, he's not going to have 4 overheads. He's
just going to have the 2.
Yeah, because his AV receiver tops out at 7 speakers max.
Oh, what am I seeing here? What is that?
You're seeing the front left and right at the front of the room.
Yeah. And then what's the square ones?
Square ones.
The Atmos ones are in front of his seat?
Yes, the Atmos ones are in front of the couch, and the surrounds are directly to the left and right.
Can we just get rid of Atmos, please?
That is certainly a thought that I had. Just stop at 5.
Just stop at 5. If you're going to put them all on the ceiling like this,
right?
Front heights are your only option. And I would consider, if you're going to do it, then you should do what I just said, which is put front heights, then put rear heights somewhere behind you on the ceiling. Atmos speakers, prime elevation speakers as well with the wedges and everything, far enough back there so that they're angled in and whatever, and just
like
mount
it seems
them to
like
your
he's
ceiling.
trying. Like I don't know everything that's involved here, but it seems like he's trying to avoid mounting anything on the ceiling itself.
That's fine,
and it seems like he doesn't want the things that are on the side walls to be low down at ear level.
Right.
So, given all of that, I'm like, my honest opinion in this room is just stop at 5. Don't even worry about adding the 2 Atmos speakers. But yeah, if you're going to, then make them front heights. Agreed.
Yeah. I don't think you're going to get your money's worth out of front heights. I'm just tell you that right now. I don't think you're going to even notice that they're there. Okay. But I would put my subwoofers to either side.
Yes, definitely.
Of my couch.
I mean, they could basically go right below where your surrounds are proposed to be.
Right.
Because I mean, SP2000 Pros, they're not big. So
no, they'll be fine.
Yeah. Midpoints of the sidewalls.
Yeah. So, yeah, I don't really understand a lot of what's going on in that picture. So that's fine. That's fine. I'm not a smart man. Oh crap!
It's coming up. It's the first thing he says is how it's pronounced. So
okay.
All right. Eagle-eared listeners will know what's coming.
All right. So Jens. Yes. Jens. I'm saying that right? Jens?
Now you're saying it right. That's it.
Jens. All right. Jens. Jens. I've been saying it wrong for a long time. He got a title named after him.
That's
so,
right.
Thankfully, Jens found the mispronunciation of his name amusing. He says to just say it like the word yes, but with an N before the S. Yeah, just. Like I'm going to be able to just do that. So as a reminder,
you can't get much more helpful than that. I don't know.
I know. I'm not saying it's his problem. I'm saying it's my problem. I'm not blaming him. Okay, as a reminder, his family recently moved. Yes, he has 2 kids, and the home theater is a small room that's open to the kitchen on the right. His seats are against the back wall, and the speakers are within the TV stand. We said to keep his dolly surrounds that are mounted up high, directly to the sides and firing straight at each other along the back wall, and to spend his money on the new receiver that he needs, and mostly on room treatments wherever they can fit, especially on his back walls. Right, because he's got the big, long thing up front that's very Scandinavian, and then the Scandinavian couch, and everything's Scandinavian because he lives in Scandinavia. Okay.
Yes.
It looks very nice. It's very white.
It does. It's very clean, very right angles.
Yes. First up, he had asked about filling his TV stand with insulation since his speakers are in there. He took our advice and put a bunch of cheap Dacron all around and behind the speakers. It does seem to have helped a bit. Good enough, or should you do anything more on that front? I don't think you can do any more on that front. There's not much room left in there. It's fine.
I mean, it is pretty loosely filled in there. You could potentially add even more insulation, but... No, I mean, the whole idea is to not have a reverberant chamber in there with nothing to prevent sound from bouncing around and echoing in there, and you've done that. It's fine.
I think you could scoot the speaker in a little bit and put some on the other side of it.
Yeah.
Because he's got it like right up against the far side wall, so the left speaker's on the left wall.
Trying to maximize the spread between the left and the right.
So buy another roll of whatever this crap is that you got in there, and put some more on move that thing in a little bit. Put
it to
I mean,
the
even
outer
if it's
edges.
just a couple of inches, throw some in there. Yeah,
sure.
What's
Agreed.
the wires? What are these wires? Is that speaker wire? What is that? Looks like there's rolls of tape down there.
Yeah, there's stuff underneath.
See, he keeps his mess inside of his cabinets. Now we know where it is.
It's really not that bad a mess.
Jens is a secret hoarder. You heard it here first.
Dear.
So he liked the idea of having images printed on acoustic panels to go on the back wall. He found Yelux in Denmark that offers printed panels, but they seem very expensive. And the graphs for their largest 4x8 panels indicate they will absorb down to 500 hertz, but then rapidly decline below that with some effectiveness down to 125, but not much.
Sounds like 1-inch thick panels is what that sounds like.
That's exactly what it sounds like, yes. So again, if you pull them off the wall by an inch, you'll get the effectiveness of a 2-inch panel, which means they'll be pretty effective down to 250.
Yep, but that's about it.
And then after that, they'll fall off. But, that's a lot more effective than down to 500, so that's pretty good. So... with just a little bit of finagling here, you can actually make this a little bit more effective than the raw stats tell you. Their smaller size panels would be more affordable, but would they be useful if they're only in specific spots on his back wall? Do we have any suggestions that are more effective and more affordable?
And I do.
Well, I mean, actual thicker panels would be more I mean, I don't know about affordable, but they would be more effective. The thicker, the better, and the farther they stand off the wall, the better. Now, you have a very white space, but you also have like corners that are like not really being used, especially the one that's behind that brown chair. If you put like a panel back there that was just white, that spanned that corner as far up as you can possibly get it without getting divorced, you could have it go up higher, and then that would give you something else. And then I just wrote an article about this. It's not published yet, but how to integrate panels. There's 3 ways you can integrate panels into your room. One, you could try to hide them, but those don't really work very well because people put them like in places where they're not very effective. Like they'll shove them in corners or put them behind furniture or something like that. 2, you can get some that are the same color as what your walls are, and just integrate them as like it's just a bump in your wall. It's almost like texture. But third, and I think this might work in here because you've got like this massive blank space all around everything, right? So all around your TV, you have a big blank space. To the left of your couch, on that back wall, you have a blank space. The pictures that are behind your couch, you could turn each of those into a little panel, or 1 big or 2 big panels that have the
multiple
prints
photos
on
on
them.
each one.
Yeah. Which just take a little photoshopping skills and stuff like that. But you could take and get either accent colors or make a pattern. Like we saw with the dude who had the foam stuff, where he had 2 different colors and made a pattern back there. And just, you get, instead of getting rectangular panels, get square ones that are 2 feet by 2 feet, hang them like a diamond on the wall, and then make a checkerboard pattern or just a weird design that has a color that accents what you have going on here, or that covers the entire wall, like behind your TV, covers that entire area up there with a very specific pattern that you and your wife kind of design. I think you could do it, man. I think it could be very cool. So trying to make it into a statement. I mean, you see this all the time on HGTV or whatever the equivalent is in Denmark, where somebody goes into their house and some designer comes in and there's a big white wall and they're like, we're going to paint some accent colors here, and then they tape it off and they paint like this weird like 70s looking green grid up there, and everybody's like, ooh, it's so nice. Well, it's just like that, except paint. Instead of paint, you get panels, and then if you don't like them, or if you change your mind, you can take them all down. You can even take the fabric off and recover them with something else and put them back up. I think that you've got some options here.
Yes, and as far as where to get them, GIK is available in Europe. They have a specific website for the European Union, and they ship worldwide, but for the European Union, they have their warehouse outlet that's out there, and so that greatly reduces the shipping as opposed to trying to get it shipped from overseas, from North America or something like that. So that is absolutely where I would go, is gikacoustics.eu. And they have the full lineup. GIK has gotten into using foam as well for lower priced options. It's about half as effective as insulation, but it is cheaper. And if it's a matter of just having some accent panels in certain places, then that would be okay. The 2-inch thick foam goes down to about 500 hertz, like a 1-inch thick insulation would. So that's why I say it's about half as effective. But yeah, those options are there. It's less expensive than that Ilux, which was several hundreds of dollars just for a single panel. And once you look at their full lineup, I think you will be inspired.
So the main problem he's having right now is boominess, which is not surprising. He's using a single SVS PB1000. He tried playing a bass sweep from 20 hertz to 200 hertz and has heard some very obvious and large fluctuations. He tried our typical recommendation of having Audyssey dynamic EQ turned on, but his typical volume setting is about -20, and then even lower at night, and having dynamic EQ on just sounded ridiculous, which is exactly what we just talked about how you lower it down and it raises the bass.
Yeah, it keeps it audible. So when you're down at like -30 or -40 and the bass is audible, which requires it to be at like 65 or 70 decibels just to be audible, and everything else is down at like 45, 50 dB, then yes, it sounds ridiculous because now the bass is completely overblown, and it was already sounding boomy before that.
Right. So bass and surround effects were blasting over the dialogue, and no matter what, it sounds boomy. Using the reference level offset at 15 helped a bit, but he just ended up turning dynamic EQ off completely. So is there anything that can help? Yeah, all these room treatments we're talking about definitely not hurt.
It won't hurt, but they won't really be dealing with the low bass.
The low bass.
The issue is placement of the subwoofer. It's pretty... I don't know where it is. I've never been able to discern in his photos where the PP1000 is.
You would think that we could see it in this room, though. It's got to be to the left of the couch.
I had earlier photos where they hadn't finished unpacking, and it's only the newest ones
Yeah.
just show the front.
It's to the left of the couch. You can see it just over the arm there. Yeah, it looks like he's got something there. Yeah,
I'm not.
It's still.
I'm not entirely sure, but regardless, I mean, it makes sense that like the PB1000, it's not a small subwoofer. It's the smallest ported subwoofer that SVS made, but it is by no means a small object. So it makes sense that maybe that is kind of the only place that physically seems to fit. But the issue is placement. If you said it yourself when you played that bass sweep and you noticed that there were fluctuations in that bass sweep, that is just a placement issue. Now, with just the single subwoofer, some of these seats in this room are going to get a bad experience no matter where you put that sub. But for the main seat, if that's the one you're mainly caring about, and you're mostly sitting centered on your love seat facing the TV, hopefully it can be improved, but it simply requires changing the position of the subwoofer. Now, we had our listener last week, Peter, who he cringes every time that we say do the subwoofer crawl, but that was because, he was going by another person's advice.
I don't think he's moving the sub.
Well, if there is literally one or two other places that it could potentially go, well, I mean, I suppose it's easy enough, just put the subwoofers there and try it out. Play bass sweeps with the subwoofers in any other locations where the sub might go, and if there is any improvement, then great. That's where the subwoofer lives now. I mean, I don't know. It's pretty hard to tell him buy a second subwoofer because if you only have
I don't think that's going to help him.
I
would say yes. If you have more than one place, I would try it in all the places.
Yes.
I would, like you've already done. You've run Audyssey, right? So at this point, we're going to turn Audyssey off, and we're just going to put them in the different spots. Yeah. We're going to run some sweeps and see what we hear. And if this spot, which is what I suspect is the spot, then you're going to be running sweeps and then sitting there with your arm over the side of the couch, fiddling with that phase knob and trying to get something that sounds a little bit better.
It's unlikely because changing the phase when you only have one subwoofer and the problem is a bass mode, which it sounds like it is. I mean, it sounds like he's just got a standing wave that happens to be at a frequency that you notice overlying dialogue. So it's going to be like 65 hertz or something like that. Can be really bad, and entirely probable that that's what's going on. And changing the phase isn't going to do that because changing the time that sound comes out isn't going to make any difference when you just have the one source of that frequency anyway. So, I mean, this is a real challenge because I guess what you could do is something we really don't recommend, but you could take all of your Audyssey measurements real close to that one location. Because if it's remained this boomy after having run Audyssey, but you ran Audyssey properly, which was moving the mic around, about 1.5 or 2 feet away from that first position, then very likely, 2 feet to your left, 2 feet to your right, it's not a hump there anymore, and that's why it didn't equalize that hump out at your main listening position. If you take all the measurements real close to that main listening position, it might be able to equalize out that hump. Now, everywhere else has a complete deficit of that frequency now, but that might be better. If the problem is that it's too boomy and you're willing to accept that the other seats get less bass, then that could be the way to do it.
Right. And like you said, getting the RTA where it gives you kind of an idea of where you're having your big problems. The PB1000, I can't remember. It had an EQ. No, it has an EQ.
PB1000 did not have an EQ. PB1000 Pro does now, but the PB1000 did not have any built-in EQ. You can use the Audyssey editor app.
Yeah, that's what I was going to suggest. If you find that you've got a massive hump and it's just going to be a problem no matter what you do, then just cut it down and call it a day.
Boominess.
Leaving dynamic EQ off makes sense to me.
Oh yes, in this 100%. Scenario.
Yeah.
I mean, again,
there's only so much.
You have a deficit of bass, but when the problem is that the bass is always too loud, well, there you go. That's the compromise you make. You have a deficit of bass. That's okay. Yeah, so dynamic EQ off, totally fine with doing that. Checking out the Audyssey editor app, clustering your measurements so that normally we don't recommend that, but in this scenario it kind of makes sense. And then that boominess it's definitely the subwoofer placement issue. And unfortunately, the acoustic treatments you're going to be adding are not going to address way down there below 80 hertz.
Right. Yeah. I just want to scroll back up and look at these pictures again. Mm-hmm. Trying to think if there's anywhere in this room where that actually could go.
The subwoofer could go.
Probably behind that brown chair would be the only other option I see as being a viable one.
And I mean, I don't know if there's potentially anywhere along the front wall that Maybe.
It really doesn't look like there's any space.
Not particularly. Yeah. I don't know how much is between the stand below the TV and the window.
So you've got a stand. You've got a stand below that mirror right there. That's a freestanding piece of furniture. If you swap that, well, no, then you can open the doors. But I was going to say you swap it with where your subwoofer is, but then you can open the doors unless it can turn the other direction. But I don't know, man.
It is a challenge.
This is a placement issue, and it's not an easy challenge. Yeah. So lastly, he says he's finding his surround speakers too localizable and a bit distracting. If he leans forward in the seat, they sound better. He wound up simply reducing their trim levels by 4 dB versus what Audyssey had set. Is it just because they are straight to his sides? There really isn't any way to move them further back. Anything that can be done or reducing the trim level is reducing their trim level okay? And as good as it's going to get. You can play a little bit here, I believe. So I'm going to go scroll back up and look at how he has. They are not on shelves.
Nope,
they are mounted flat
to the side walls, basically right against the back wall, which makes sense because his seats are right against the back wall. If you are able to get the acoustic treatments and cover a good portion of that back wall, that might actually help in this, because you are definitely getting reflection from the surround speakers off of the very reflective back wall,
especially
right now.
The right speaker. I'm guessing you're getting a ceiling bounce that's probably pretty heinous on that thing. Not that you're going to be able to really fix that unless you put something on your ceiling, but you could. There's a couple of things that could be happening here. Now, I don't know how aimable. These don't look like they're aimable.
Those are just bookshelf speakers, and they're mounted flush to the wall.
If these are mounted flush, and that's how they're mounted. Like if they were on like a pivot mount of any kind, or even on a shelf, I might suggest that you aim them up a little bit, or aim them to the front of you a little bit. Just try to get a little bit off axis and to change where the bounce is off the back wall. But if you can put like some sort of panel to the sides of these things, between them and the walls, that could make a pretty big difference there.
And then even after that, if you're just like, I'm still noticing more than I want to, turning down the trim level like 3 dB, I got no problem with that at all. I mean, sometimes people say, I want to notice my surrounds more, so they turn the trim level up 3 dB, and I have no problem with that either.
Like I said before, getting an expert opinion in this case, which is Audyssey setting everything for you and then saying, I don't like the way it sounds, that's fine.
Yep.
You got the expert opinion, which is Audyssey said this is where it should be, and you said, I don't like it. Guess what? It's your house. You should not be able to like it.
Especially those things, how audible surround effects are, absolutely. Yeah. Whether you want a little more bass, a little less bass, absolutely. But you started at the bass line, that's good.
Good. Carl has a Denon X4400H powering a 5.1.4 configuration. He'd like to add a pair of surround backs, but he needs 2 more channels of amplification. He is not falling down the rabbit hole, says you. He just wants a cheap 2-powered amp to power, well, it ended up being his rear Atmos speakers, won't it?
Yes, it will.
Yeah. Monoprice has a $113 50 watt per channel Class D amp. Is it good enough? One reason he likes it is because it has 12-volt trigger input and output, which a lot of other inexpensive 2-channel amps don't have. Does the trigger cable need to be mono, or will a stereo 3.5 millimeter cable work? It's usually mono, but this might work with it. I'm looking at it.
I mean, mono, so that on that question, mono cable for sure will work. Sometimes it works with a stereo. It depends on how long they made the sleeve connection. I mean, some people have even found if they pull out a stereo 3.5 millimeter plug just a little bit, it makes contact inside. It depends on how they spaced things on the inside of that plug. The safe answer is if you just get a mono 3.5 millimeter cable.
It's not like you're breaking the bank doing that, dude. I know you're trying to save money here.
Get it from Monoprice.
If you look at the back of this amplifier, it's got it does. I don't think those are the compression style.
No, it's the Phoenix connector. It's the Phoenix connector,
which are just awful.
I know, but you only have to do it once, really.
Right. So just double check that you lock down those screws like you're supposed to, because they're not the compression style, which it has the little spring, and you pull it up and then you stick the thing in there. This is a screw and it's a nightmare. I've got an amp that I literally bought another amp to go in my home theater, even though I had an amp, because I didn't want to deal with those stupid connectors. I hate it so much. So to me, they were worth spending a little extra money just so I didn't have to deal with that. Okay. But Class D amplification, you're putting almost no power into this thing anyways. So This is perfect.
It'd be fine. I mean, our favorite one, the Dayton APA 102, that you can get over at Parts Express. It is a little bit more expensive. It's $130. So, so $15 more than this monoprice one you're looking at. But that also has trigger. So if trigger was the thing, the 12-volt trigger, then that Dayton APA 102 has it as well. So, and that has regular speaker binding posts. So if those are worth $15 to you, that is certainly still an option. But yeah, if you got this monoprice,
totally spend $15 for the regular binding post.
Right, exactly.
I would totally do it.
There you go.
All right, let's stop.
It's
been so who we got left?
We put a good dent in it, and we have Bobby, Gurinder, Mike, and let's see. Oh, Mike's was longer than I remembered. Kevin, there we go. That is who is still on the list, and anybody that came in on Monday and Tuesday. All
right, we want to thank Kevin for being one of our listeners of the week and giving us a PayPal donation by going to avrant.com and clicking on the Buy Us a Cup of Coffee link. We also want to thank our 125 patrons over at patreon.com.
For sure, Kevin. Thank you very much for that PayPal donation. Really do appreciate that. And patreon.com/AVRant podcast for anyone who would like to sign up for an automatic monthly donation. Thank you very much to our 125 patrons over there.
So we want to also thank Byron for sending Rob a tip via PayPal for helping him out on Twitter.
We do indeed, Byron. Thank you so much. Already thanked him on Twitter, of course, but yes, very much appreciated. Thank you, Byron.
And also James for introducing Rob to the MRX740 receiver.
Yeah, learned quite a bit. Useful information to have. Thanks, James, for having me over. And that was good. Actually got out of the house, and hopefully none of us caught anything. I don't think so.
That's right.
We all seemed fine. We're all masked up.
We'll know in 2 weeks.
Stayed far away and all that kind of stuff. I mean, it hasn't been too bad here in BC as far as COVID stuff goes. So fingers crossed, and we did take precautions.
And lastly, we want to thank Eric, Ari, Tyler, Dave, Carl, and Bobby for sending us notes of gratitude for keeping the podcast going.
For sure. Eric, Ari, Tyler, Dave, Carl, and Bobby do appreciate those notes of gratitude for keeping the podcast going. The notes of encouragement, it is still very much needed and appreciated. So thank you for those. Thank you to everybody who continues to listen and send in your questions.
If you want to get your question answered, all you have to do is ask. You ask by emailing us at question@avrant.com. For AVRant, I'm Tom Andry.
And I'm Rob H. Now stay in and listen to something.
Want your question answered? Send it to question@avrant.com. This is AVRant.
Now go out and listen to something.